Hey everyone, Keylime here. This time around I think I'm going to do a class tier list since making tier lists is fun. So yeah, let's do that. So I've created up another tier list template here. You can always grab this off a tier maker. I'll leave this in the description so folks can end up making their own if they would like. But for this tier list, what I'm going to end up doing is looking at the class, looking what it does, seeing what kind of troops you can generally put with that kind of a class, and then talk about its overall utility as far as the game is concerned. Again, this is going to be an overall type tier list, so this isn't meant to say this is the best class in every situation, this is the best class for only delves, this is the best class for only events. This is kind of like if you were going to level up any class, these are the ones that are going to yield you the most value overall. Most of these classes have benefit in their own niche ways. Some of them you'll see are actually pretty trash, but at least you'll always have, for the ones that are in the higher tiers, they'll always have some kind of value in a lot of different areas of the game. So without further ado, we can start with our old friend the Frostmage, since that happens to be the first one on the list. So Frostmage here, from a traits perspective, one magic every spell, this is fine. The ability to freeze every 25% is generally okay. There's definitely cards that can do this freezing more frequently, but overall, freezing is always a very nice debuff to do to the other team. It's going to prevent a lot of extra turns. So a class that's kind of set up to just get you that by default is pretty cool. The fact that it has some form of like magic pump by default is also pretty cool. From a traits perspective, it's okay. Talents, the water tree is always nice because you get the snap freeze and then the immunity from frozen, so this is some pretty nice protection. Of course, you're going to get this 20% reduction to spells, so this is also very nice. A little extra survivability. Having 50% mana start is also extremely nice. The ability to just submerge every 4/5 is very nice. This is my favorite trait here, or talent, so anyone that has this is going to be at a minimum a C tier, I would think. We'll see if that's true or not. I know a Deathknight's in there at some point. But this is also very nice to do. And then even if you didn't like this, there's also really nice other talents here as well. And this ability to magic pump even further, at least with elementals, potentially with mystics, potentially with merfolk, not so terrible, but at level 70 they kind of peter out. As far as like what they are, what they do, so Glacial Peaks, Fey type troop, this is the 4.4 version of this screen for folks that haven't seen it just yet. So it's a Fey type troop, it's Glacial Peaks. You'll know if you've played for a while that Fey are not really good. There's not really any kind of interesting, awesome Fey type troops that you can put in there. Glacial Peaks, there's a lot of interesting things. There's things like Scotty, Queen Mab. So if we go into here and we do a base rarity for a troop type of Fey, you'll see that as far as the Fey type troops that are in there, it's kind of like Scotty is not generally considered all that great. Yasmin's Chosen is definitely useful. Alderfather gets some play. Glitterclaw not so much really. Mab is cool. Queen Titania is nice. Daughter of Ice is nice. But what kind of makes this Fey thing not that interesting is that there's really not any troops that do stuff with other Fey, so it's kind of like, even if you build a team of all Fey, I think only the more recently released like Starcaller, if that's her name, gets some kind of benefit from having extra Fey out there. I'm sure they'll release a weapon at some point that'll do an all Fey, but Fey is not really something you can build a lineup, and there's nothing about the class itself that's benefiting Fey. So the fact that there's no other classes that benefit Fey, no troops rather, that benefit Fey, it's kind of hard to get any value out of that. That all being said, what makes Frostmage actually a really nice class is the other stuff that we just talked about in the tree. From a traits perspective, they're pretty decent, like this is an okay level of traits to have. But from the talents, there's actually the really nice stuff. So anyone that's getting this 50% mana start is always going to be really nice. Anyone that gets this lightning strike is always going to be nice from my perspective. The fact that this has a little bit of utility as far as submerge, as far as being immune to frozen and then actually freezes themselves. This is actually a pretty cool setup. This is going to be a very useful class in PvP and Guild Wars most especially, but there's definitely some events that you could play this. Just never put this class in the first slot if you can avoid it. There's no natural protections aside from that spell reduction. So overall, as far as the class goes, I'm going to put Frostmage as a solid A. Can't really go wrong. From a Knight team perspective, so if we look at the traits for Knight, they're kind of garbage, like across the board. So everything in here is really bad. Gaining 2 armor every turn is like way too slow. Like even if this was gained 10 armor every turn, I don't think I would really care about this. So these traits are just very slow to do anything, very weak as far as anything's concerned, just not that great. Like again, even if this was gain 10 attack when somebody dies, I wouldn't care about this. So traits are pretty bad. As far as the trees go, the problem is that there's really nothing in here that's like making everything amazing. So morale type trees, these are kind of like just minor bumps all over the place. So the fact that you can do Arsaka troops getting 1 attack return is not very cool. Allies starting with 15% mana, not the worst thing in the planet, but not that great. Commander, okay, just a minor stat bump if you're in the first slot. 10% extra XP is whatever. Knights getting 2 armor just 1 time, whatever. Jewelry times with +2, gaining 5 attack in PvP, that's probably like the only thing useful in the entire morale tree. Maybe the 15% mana start. So, I mean, morale tree in general is a pretty weak tree to have. There's like little nice things in here, but nothing that great. When we look at the light tree, again, it's kind of all these like little things. So this Brilliant Aura is probably the most interesting thing as far as the gaining 2 life on 4-5 matches. This is all allies. So that's kind of cool. If you build a very loop heavy lineup, you can get some decent amount of life from this. It's not going to be crazy, but it's at least something. Creating a light storm at the start of a battle is potentially useful. This one-time armor thing, not very useful. Bonus yellow is always nice, so I'm not going to complain about that. Divinity is pretty slow, just 2 every turn for only divine allies. So in the light tree, you're getting some benefit, so that's like okay. And then the Guardian tree again is like kind of one of those where there's some cool things, but it's not like amazing. Like none of these trees are top tier in any capacity. So 1-time stat bump, 1-time stat bump, barrier at the start of battle. This like extra damage from having armor, this is cool. Like you would think this would be a class defining trait since this knight class is all about having armor. You'd think this would be like super heavy smacking stuff, but it's really not all that amazing. You will certainly hit pretty hard, but there's nothing else that's really amazing. Like you'll start with a barrier, you'll hit pretty hard with skulls, but you're pretty much yellow mana oriented by default with this light tree. And then I really hate Savior. Banishment is kind of whatever. Like it's cool, it is very good, but again, it's kind of like when you think of all of these trees, there's nothing in any of these that's like sick, like, you know, oh my god, I have to use this class. So that kind of makes it a problem for the knight. As far as what they are, so it's a knight type, of course, and it's from Sword's Edge. So if we're looking at troops that are knights specifically, you're going to find that there's like some okay ones, but there's no like sick ones. So Champion of Anu's, whatever. Guard's Avatar is kind of really bad. War is generally considered pretty bad. Yzabel's okay. Yeah, we're starting to already hit the well here. Like there's nothing really here. So unfortunately, when it comes to knights, there's not really any kind of things you can build around. Like there's nothing about a knight class that's inspiring me to try and make a all-knight lineup where having him as a knight's going to be useful. There's no like traits that are making me excited. There's no talent trees that are making me excited. So unfortunately, as far as the knight's concerned, this guy's going to be an F. There's really nothing of note there, unfortunately. If you've got a cool knight lineup, definitely let me know. Paste it in the comments below. With mechs, so we're going to do, with the Mechanist I should say, 50% mana start, so that's pretty cool. The fact that it applies to all mechs is very nice, so if there's very useful mechs, then this is actually a pretty cool class to run. We'll see if that's true. And then from a talents perspective, so again, we kind of have these weaker talents, which is kind of the problem. So Guardian Tree we've already reviewed in detail, but Wind is kind of another one of these like minor trees. So 1-time stat pump, 1-time stat pump, all yellow starting with 10% is whatever. Centaur's getting a 1-time stat pump, yellow allies getting a 1-time stat pump. The ability to summon people is whatever, and then Strix like getting stuff is whatever. So nothing really good in the Wind tree pretty much at all. Like I don't think I like any of those. Maybe this 10% one. And then Knowledge is kind of okay. There's like some interesting utility stuff. So a random status effect is fine. You know, it's not going to make or break anything. 3 magic 1-time stat pump. Summoning golems is whatever. Getting an extra 3 magic is kind of whatever. All allies getting 1 magic is kind of whatever. Enchanting on green can be useful sometimes, but I find enchant is a generally weak buff. I find that when you enchant, it's just kind of a little slow. 2 mana every turn still means you need like 12 turns to fill somebody, so hopefully your mana generation is good enough that you don't need to lean on this, but in emergencies it can be pretty cool. And then Master Builder is also kind of not that great. So when it comes to the talent trees, the Guardian tree is pretty much the only one it really has going for it, and again, it's that barrier at the start, and it's the hitting harder with skulls kind of thing. But Dispel is always nice. I'm not going to say Dispel isn't cool, especially in these days of life and death meta defense teams. Dispel will just take off all the blasts, all the barrier, all that other fun stuff. So the Guardian Tree is pretty much its only saving grace. But again, it's kind of like there's nothing in here that I can really build around. So just looking at the class by itself, there's really nothing all that crazy. When we look at what it is, it's Adana mech type. So the fact that it's mech itself means it's going to start with 50% mana. That's always nice. When we look at the troops that are actually of mech type, I should probably stop clearing that sort. Not roll. Holy crap. Sorry, I'm still getting used to the order of all these things after the update. So if we're looking at mechs, Tina starting with 50% mana is super good. So that's actually a really nice thing to have. Dracos is kind of not all that useful. Karnax is, again, like, he's okay, but Exploding Skulls is kind of a weird thing to do. He's not super damage resistant, but he does have some damage resistance. I don't find him the best troop to use, but he does start with 50% mana if you're running him with Mechanist, so that's pretty cool. Clockwork Knight's okay in some capacity because you can transform something into yellow. He does have really decent skull reduction, so he's somebody that I could potentially see trying to build lineups around. But again, his mana cost is super low, so starting with 50% means you can more or less get using him right away. So that's okay. But that's like kind of it. Like Deep Boar is the only other one who gets some kind of use, which he's creating brown gems when he destroys a column. Some decent survivability. This blue mana extra is kind of cool. So when it comes to like what mechs can I even try and build around, it gets a little weird. There's not like super sick ones. So the fact that it starts with 50% mana start for all mechs is going to give it at least some level of utility. But as far as everything's concerned, I'm either thinking like low B, high C. I'm going to chuck him in the... I'll put him in the B. Probably he's going to end up at the tail end of the B column. So that'll bring us to Necromancer. So Necromancer, what they're all about here is like they're kind of an undead soul generating typey thing. So you can see that applies here. All of these are pretty awful. Like these are all actually really awful. So gaining an extra soul on 4/5s is super slow. Like even if you blew up and got 7 extra turns in one turn, that's only 7 souls. That's pretty poor. So nothing about the traits are useful at all. When we look at the talent trees, however, there is some saving graces. So we get the Arcane Tree, which as we covered before, you're getting your 20% spell reduction, you're getting 50% mana start. You do get bonus purple, which generally synergizes with this like undead theme that it's got going on. So Arcane Tree makes it at least okay. When we get to the Shadow Tree, which we haven't covered yet, there's kind of like nothing here, summoning is whatever if you like it. Dark Storm at the start is pretty okay, but it's not going to get picked over 50% mana start, so you're not really going to pick this pretty much anyway. And then Stealthy is very cool, so there's nothing wrong with being a stealthy type class. I'm not going to fire against anybody for making a 50% mana starting stealthy class. There's some value there. So that's okay. Poisoning an enemy when you match purple gems is kind of nothing useful at all. I could argue that if you wanted to build a very specific Scorpius lineup where you're poisoning people and then you don't feel like putting like Uralai or somebody else to do the poison stuff and you just want to lean on this, Scorpius is purple himself, so there's potentially some benefit with this. That's kind of it. Poison in general is pretty much the worst. But this 7% Assassinate is where things are kind of cool. It's a pretty low percent chance, so the difference between something like this and Megavore, for instance, so this one is there's a 7% chance to kill somebody when you kill somebody. So there's 4 people on the team, obviously, so if you kill somebody, you know, there's a 7% chance. If you kill another somebody, there's another 7% chance, and if you kill another somebody, there's another 7% chance. So you'll get 3 7% chances of having this do anything within a fight. If you're fighting like a massively summon heavy lineup, this will potentially trigger at least maybe once. Of course, you're going to always hear those stories where someone had it trigger like 3 to 5 times in like one single fight, and they just won when they killed one guy. That's like totally possible with certain kind of lineups you can do. But overall, this is like a super low chance. So, I mean, if you can build a really good lineup that doesn't depend on this in any kind of capacity, the fact when it triggers, that'll always be pretty cool. Again, you're getting 50% mana start and you'll be stealthy, so there's definitely some cool benefits there. So this is actually, as far as the level 100 talents go, this is one of the higher tier ones because this actually has some utility pretty much across the board. Of course, this would have no utility in terms of like a raid boss fight or an invasion event where like lethal damage is not a thing. But for like general usage in PvP and Guild Wars, in some events, this will have some useful stuff. And then we get to the death tree, which is kind of a weird one. So one-time stat pump, freezing someone when someone dies. I don't like this. Soul Collar, 1 soul every turn. This is also pretty bad. Ice Storm at the start of battle, that's okay, but again, you're not going to take it over 50% mana, so you're kind of back in that same situation where I like both of these a lot, but I'm never picking them over 50% mana start, unless I'm running something like a Leprechaun or like an Instinct Inverter that's going to get me going even faster. This is generally going to be the better play most of the time, but in a very niche lineup, these can both definitely be better than Mana Source. Life Siphon's pretty cool, so getting 2 life from the first enemy on every 4-5 match. So again, if you have a very loop-heavy lineup, this is kind of a fun way to slowly leak health into your hero and kind of steal it from whatever they've got running in the front line. It's very slow, but it's definitely not awful. But again, you're not going to take it over stealthy, so it's kind of this weird problem where it is cool, but there's something else that's better. So far in this entire talent tree, there's not a single thing in here that I would really say you should be picking up. So I mean, regardless of whether you like the death tree or not, it's kind of up against better trees, so it's kind of a wasted slot here. Death marking somebody at the start of a battle is kind of okay, but again, bonus purple mana is probably better. Death mark is a very inconsistent kind of debuff, so I can't really say that I would prefer this. And then at level 100, there's, again, it's up against Rising Shadows, so Rising Shadow is going to win. So as far as utility goes, like, this is an okay thing. I mean, starting with 50%, having a little spell reduction, being stealthy, having this assassinate, that's pretty cool. But as we reviewed in here, like, the traits are really trash. So it's tough. I honestly don't think there's very much good about the Necromancer, unfortunately. So I'm going to put them here in the C tier. It's pretty close to F tier in all honesty, but C tier, I guess, is where to land for now. So then looking at the Oracle, so from a trait perspective, this is all garbage. There's nothing really good in there, so I apologize if anyone really loves Oracle for some reason. From a tree perspective, as we covered in the light tree, that there's this Brilliant Aura, which is pretty useful. The fact that you can start a Light Storm at the start of fights are pretty useful. Bonus Yellow is pretty useful. So light tree is pretty decent. From the knowledge tree perspective and a wind tree perspective, they're really not good. So we're going to have to see what can we possibly do with an Oracle that could be interesting. So Centaur troop type from a Divinian field, that's okay. I mean, there's not a great amount of Centaurs. For what it's worth, Death Visions is kind of an interesting weapon. You can do some cool stuff with this. You can probably guess by how high I've leveled this so far that it might not be the best class on the planet. But since this is a Centaur type, and I apologize, I just realized I never looked at the undead type from the last one, but I guess you can take my word there's not that many good ones, which still justifies this at C tier. We'll look at undead for one of these later classes anyway. But again, sorting by troop type here for Centaurs. If we're looking at Centaurs, there's not, like, it's not that there's bad Centaurs. Like, Worldbreaker is actually pretty cool, but he himself is not really doing anything interesting as a Centaur. There's nothing about him that makes him, as a Centaur, is pretty cool. So for Artima, she actually does do some kind of natural boosting with other Centaurs. So she's dealing damage to 2 people, the 2 weakest people, so this is useful. She has some mana generation with explosions. The boost ratio is pretty decent actually, so times 5. So if you built a lineup where you're running an Oracle, you have like Worldbreaker, you have Artima, and then somebody else, you actually can do some pretty decent damage with her. But it's kind of tough. Like, she definitely wants to be put in the first slot because she can potentially hurt really hard with skulls, and she can also potentially dodge skulls. But the mana generation from exploding a row is not that great, and it's also kind of hard to accurately plan for extra turns with this. So as far as Centaurs go, like, not that amazing. Orion is useful somewhat, not really at all in the end game, but at least in the early game he has some benefit or utility. Herdmaster is always kind of cool, getting bonus yellow, so that would stack with your natural Oracle bonus yellow. He's a mana generation that cleanses everybody, so that's kind of cool. He's okay, but that's kind of it. So there's not really that many cool centaurs to build around. Like Artema is arguably the only one that's really doing anything super cool. Again, there's like nothing else that's really interesting here. I want to double check that I'm not wrong about having someone with a mana start thing in the Oracle. He does. Yeah, so there's nothing in here that's giving all centaurs 50% mana start. So overall, Oracle class, the amount of things you can build around what the class does itself, also pretty bad. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to throw that down in F tier as well. I would put it above Knight, however, but still pretty bad, unfortunately. So that brings us to Orbweaver. How many of you are leveling Orbweaver right now because you secretly hate yourself on the inside? I suspect a lot of you. But so what Orbweaver's all about is being like super annoying is basically the name of the game. So these are all pretty bad, nothing all that interesting. Being resistant to mana drain and mana steal is kind of cool in the life and death lineup that it's in. That's obviously very useful. But familiar is where the annoying fun stuff happens. So 50% chance whenever you take any damage whatsoever creating a spider. That creates a lot of survivability in the sense that you're just constantly littering the board on your side with giant spiders. So obviously that's pretty interesting. As far as trees go, so we've reviewed Morale, which is kind of like whatever. There are all these minor stat bumps. Shadow, again, is where this class gets some added annoying things. So if you are a summoning type lineup, which Orbweaver very much is, here's an additional summon that you're getting, which is a 20% chance to summon if you lose somebody. So whenever you lose somebody on your side, there's a chance you're going to put someone else in there. If your hero ever gets hurt, there's a chance you're going to put somebody else in there. You're stealthy, so you're kind of hard to hit. And you potentially get the 7% to assassinate at the tail end. So if you kill anybody, you potentially get more. So Shadow Tree is definitely a pretty cool add. Forest Tree, however, I really like. So webbing someone when you summon a troop, you can imagine, is actually, in this kind of a class, very cool. Normally when I see this talent, it has next to no utility whatsoever, but this one in a summon-heavy lineup is actually very cool. So you'll be webbing a bunch of people. Again, you're very annoying, but it will totally work. Perfect Aim is throwaway. Root Trap is very nice, so entangling somebody at the start of battle is very strong, so this is also very cool. So right away you can kind of see you're webbing people whenever you're summoning people, you're entangling someone right off the start. Here you can kind of pick which storm you want to start with, but both of these are actually very nice. So spiders and other types of troops that normally would run with this kind of a lineup actually would be green or purple, so that's pretty cool. Again, you're going to be taking stealthy at level 40. I couldn't really see you ever trying to put them as commander. One of the main benefits of having a stealthy class is that you don't put them in the first slot because you're trying to protect them, especially in a summoning lineup. You want to be summoning stuff above your hero, not below them. So this is kind of pointless. Elven Sentries and Harvest Moon are both pretty trash. So basically what this class is all about is just summon, protect yourself, summon, maybe get an extra kill. So from a defense team perspective, this is actually a very good class. I think I will generally dislike you if you ever use this, but I can't argue with its effectiveness. Doesn't mean I like to play against it, but fortunately you don't have to use your defense teams, you just need to set them. So that's what's going on there. As far as the troop type, so it's an elf type from Zulkari. So elf type is kind of weird. So if we look at what the elves are, you'll find that there's kind of like not any sick ones. So Arachnean Weaver is obviously cool. It's odd that he's an elf type. I always kind of picture him as like a huge spider, but I guess he's more of just like a head and a body who's somehow an elf. But he's obviously good, but there's no synergy there. The fact that they're both elves, there's nothing really like helping elves in this capacity, so having an Arachnean Weaver in your lineup isn't necessarily helping. However, King Avalorn is where that does come in, so all elves will start battle with 50% mana. So you can kind of see how this life and death team got made anyway, right? Like the first person to try it. All elves starting with 50% mana, there's an Orbweaver, there's this new weapon, Life and Death, and then you have Arachnean Weaver. Like, the King Avalorn part, the Arachnean Weaver part, like, kind of make themselves since they're elf, and then the class is an elf. And then it was just a question of what kind of mana do I need, and someone put a Graveseer in there. So you can kind of see how the team made itself, unfortunately, once Life and Death as a weapon came out. However, King Avalorn, as far as elves go, is going to be very useful. Yao is an elf, so that's actually pretty cool. And then Widow Queen is kind of awkward. I would never use her, but she does have this ability to web people constantly. So as far as Orbweaver is concerned, there's a lot of utility, there's a lot of survivability. They don't bring any kind of like amazing class things to themselves. Like if you want a 50% mana starter, you can get it with another troop, but now you have to have like a different troop in your lineup to get the benefit from it. So overall, from a defense class perspective, I would say that this is actually fairly high. From an attack team perspective, I think like a summon heavy, web heavy lineup is not necessarily the best thing on the planet. So overall, I'm going to put this at like probably a high C tier. Defense-wise, I would say this is probably more of an A, but as far as overall utility goes, like you are not going to build teams around this in any capacity except for defense. I've never seen someone use an offensive Orbweaver team and like think that this was any kind of useful awesomeness. So that brings us to Plaguelord. So Plaguelord, what they're all about is kind of this diseasing theme. However, disease is not necessarily the best thing on the planet. From their base traits point of view, it's pretty garbage. Inflicting disease on people randomly when you match green is not great. Having people that are diseased is not that special. There's nothing that super synergizes with diseases in the first place. So looking at the traits, it's obviously not that great. But we do get some cool talent trees in here, which makes it a lot more interesting. So Arcane, as we already reviewed, very cool, 20%, 50%. That's pretty nice. The fact that you can get bonus purple is also pretty nice. However, now we're getting a chaos tree, so demons getting one attack is not great. Stealing one life whenever you match purple is okay. It's pretty bad. It's worse than the other version that we looked at before. Diseasing again on 4/5s is kind of whatever. It's like disease, if you're not familiar, it's just making it so they take basically half mana. So whenever they match gems, they're only getting half the benefit. That sounds really strong, but in reality, mana generation is so strong these days that even if you're cutting them in half, it still feels like people don't really have a lot of struggles to fill up. So not all that complicated. Spawn of Hell is like a summoning thing, so but it requires you killing an enemy to summon something, so this is kind of an awkward thing. If you're killing somebody and then you're potentially summoning yourself, it's like a power dynamic shift, you would think, but in reality this isn't all that useful. Sudden Doom, so this is a Doom Storm at the start of a battle. This is kind of scary. So obviously if you are going to pick this, you're going to want to make sure that you have some kind of skull tank sitting at the top, or you have some way of ensuring that you're not the one eating all these skulls. But you're not going to be taking this anyway, more than likely, because Rock Solid is there. We'll talk about that in a second. Delirium is not that great. Chaos Wave is, again, really not that great. So the only thing that's kind of interesting in here is potentially the Plague Bearer part. And again, disease isn't all that strong, so the entire Chaos tree on here is kind of not that great. The Chaos Storm, or the Sudden Doom thing, I should say, there's some potential here to do some crazy stuff. So you could build lineups that are taking great effect of this. The fact that it has stone with it will make this a little more useful, but overall I think this is kind of a scary way to start the game. Stone is very cool, so we haven't hit a class that's had it yet, but so Stone is going to inflict stun whenever people do skull damage to you, so this is actually really nice, as long as you're sitting up there in the first slot. Stunning the enemy team when they hit you is very nice. Hammer Mastery is kind of throwaway, Stone Circle's throwaway, Dwarven Armor's throwaway. Rock Solid, however, is like a amazing thing. Pretty much if you're ever offered this, you have to take it. It's kind of hard to not take it. So when it comes to the stone tree in general, the fact that you're getting impact is really nice. The fact that you're getting rock solid is very nice. Stone Mastery is always potentially cool. However, it's going to come down to whether you want brown or purple in this instance. If you do have your stone tree and you do pick rock solid, it's going to be hard to imagine a world where you wouldn't want Stone Mastery. You're going to be wanting matching browns as often as you can, and this will just give you more brown mana for the money. And then Fortitude is really nice. So when it comes to like talent tree tier listing, if you will, like Arcane and Stone are extremely high value ones. So if you see a class that's got them both on the same one, it's obviously very cool. So overall, from a talent perspective, it's a little bit defensive oriented. So you're getting barriers on browns, you're having this natural 20% spell reduction, you're getting some extra bonus mana. So overall, it's kind of cool. But it's kind of a weird one. The 50% mana start, the berries on browns, that's obviously very cool, but the disease part from the talents is not all that special, so, or from the traits is not all that special. So it's kind of a weird mix. Like, I like 2 of the talent trees that exist in it, and that makes me want to build around it. But if we're looking at what they are, it's a human type. So we'd have to look at who we can build around with humans. Essence of Evil is a weapon, by the way. If you don't have this, you can tell, or maybe you've guessed. I'm only class level 5, but I magically have this. I just burned a major orb of ascension to get it. This weapon is busted. Like, get this weapon no matter what you can do. You basically just turn one troop into a useless piece of crap, and you blow up the entire board. I'm just going to go ahead and say this weapon needs a nerf of some kind. As much as I like using it, when you get it used on you, it's like the most frustrating thing on the planet. It's not that it's like completely indefensible, but it's really frustrating to deal with. This felt busted before it even came out. So, in any event, human troops. So let's look at some human troops that we can build around. So we're going again by our base rarity, troop type human. And when we look at the humans, Possessed King is in there, but him being a human isn't really useful as far as them being both human is concerned. Possessed King is more of a demon type troop. Orpheus being human, again, not all that interesting. Him being a human isn't all that useful here. There's no benefit to being human. Divine is helping divine, so that's not that useful. However, Astra is somebody where all humans will start with 50% mana, so and she's just giving a crap ton of life and armor to all allies, then creating a light storm, and then enchanting all humans. So as far as humans go, she's actually one of the best defensive troops you could potentially have. And you'll naturally want to try and put her in human-specific kind of lineups because of this all-human starting with 50%. However, your hero already has 50% mana start just by being a Plague Bearer, so it's kind of hard to try and build around her. The other problem I have with her is that she has no loot potential whatsoever, so whenever you have to hand over your turn to the other team to get some kind of defensive benefit, to me that's like a bad trade. It's kind of praying that you're able to turtle faster than they can kill you, and that's just not a fight that you can generally win. It's a lot easier to do a lot of damage than it is to like prevent damage. Let's just put it that way. Magnus fits pretty nicely with this class overall because he's doing a random status effect on 4 or 5 matches. However, he's doing extra damage boosted by people that are already poisoned and diseased, and he poisons and diseases everybody himself. And he's human, but again, him being human isn't really all that interesting unless you're building a lineup with Astra and Magnus. So, not all that interesting. And that's kind of it. Like, pretty much Saint Astra is the only useful human that's in here, like, trying to build around the fact that she's human. So, overall, that's not really helping its class placement. So for me, it's a little bit defensive, but the whole disease-oriented style of lineup, the 50% mana start, to me, it's not really bringing much to the table that I couldn't get better in other classes. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in like a lower B tier. The fact that it's only giving 50% to itself is kind of hurting it. Then we get to Priest. I'm not sure why I keep closing this window. So Priest is kind of weird. If we look at the talents here, the traits, not that great. Bonus yellow is cool, not that great. It's all allies every turn, but it's still like very slow. However, you'll see that like there's kind of a lot of this going on with the Priest class, so that makes it kind of more interesting. Just remember that it already gets bonus yellow, because that's kind of cool with this class. So we get introduced to the life tree with this class. So Resilience is gaining 8 life. That's actually, as far as like one-time stat pumps go, that's actually a pretty nice one. It's 8. I believe there's another one somewhere else that's like 10 armor, but this one's nice. However, we get access to Purification, which is actually really nice. So cleansing yourself on 4 or 5 gem matches is really strong. As I talked about before, the knowledge tree is not that useful, so we can kind of ignore it. But now we're basically looking at light and life. But now we're getting self-cleansing ability, and then we're recovering every turn. So I think what's of note here about recover is that I believe the way that recover is actually set up in this game is that recover means up to your normal max, and healing is healing and gaining, I believe, is allowed to go over your max. So recovering will mean like if your starting health was 50 and then you got hit down to 48, you'll heal up to 50. But then the next turn after that, you're not going to heal up to 52. You're just going to stay at 50 because you've recovered up to your max health. So recover is kind of a weird one, and it's only for you. So this isn't all that great in reality, but it kind of fits into this theme of just having a ton of life. So it's okay, but not that great. Again, giving 2 health to everybody on 4 or 5 matches, it's just way better. Like there's no reason you would ever take this over this, like pretty much ever, like ever. So then we get this Fey Vengeance, so verifying your random enemy when an ally dies. This is garbage. Like there's nothing I hate more than a thing that depends on you dying to work. I'm never going to build a lineup that depends on that. It's the worst way, it's the worst mentality to play. So this is not good. Healing Herb is more interesting, so you're gaining 4 life when you match green gems. The thing that kind of sucks with this is that the priest is more yellow mana oriented, so it's kind of tough. Trying to build a green mana lineup specifically means you have to kind of fight what the class is trying to do. So this is, while it's cool, it's not that synergistic with what it actually does, so it's a little unfortunate. Then we get an option between Nature's Will and Lightbringer, so bonus green, bonus yellow. So for this, you're going to almost want to pick the yellow for sure, because we already have a natural +1 yellow as one of our traits. Now we have an option to take an extra +1 yellow from a talent. If you pair that with a banner, that's also +2 yellow. Now you're looking at +4 yellow every single time you match. That it would be nuts. So you can either take like +1 yellow, +1 green, so your trait will get you 1 yellow, this will get you 1 green. But I think the idea of building around a super yellow team is actually very nice. And of course, like if you are building a super yellow team, you can start with a Lightstorm, and if you're starting with a Lightstorm and you're building a lot of yellow mana, you'll be giving everyone life with every 4 or 5 match, so that's also really nice. And then up at level 100, it's kind of like, it's whatever. There's nothing all that special down here. So Priest is kind of cool. Like if you're trying to build a very yellow mana heavy lineup and you don't need your hero to be tanky in any capacity, this is a class you might want to look at, but it's not really offering a ton, right? So it doesn't have that 50% mana start. It doesn't have any kind of like crazy loot potential. The thing that it really has going for it is that it potentially has a lot of chances to be resilient somewhat, because you're going to be gaining life constantly with this type of thing. You could have picked this, which would give you even more starting health to start with. You can cleanse yourself, so like as far as defensive troop goes, it's kind of nice. But then really what you're going to be using this for is yellow mana generation. So if you're in a lineup that can make a lot of yellow mana, or you're trying to find a class that can make a lot of yellow mana or do something interesting with a lot of yellow mana, Priest would be something that you're more interested in. But it is kind of weaker in terms of like utility talents. There's not a lot there to try and make it more useful. As far as what it is, however, it's Divine. So as you may know, that Divine is kind of sick. So pretty much all of the top tier troops at some point in this game were Divine. Like it feels like Divine is kind of the game's default like god class. So when you look at Divines, obviously you see someone like Infernus, Jotner's okay, Pharos is whatever. Queen Aurora, pretty nice defensive troop. Voice of Orpheus, also very nice utility type troop. Yasmin's Chosen. However, what's probably most notable here is Divine Ishbala. So starting with 40% mana is obviously very cool. But overall, Divines are kind of sick. So Force Guardian's very cool, Divinia's very cool, Quillen's very cool. Putting Divine in your lineup with a Priest is also really nice because she's also making yellow. So the fact that she will give everyone 40% mana start and make more yellow, like if you have a Priest lineup that's not running Divine Ishbala in some capacity, you're probably not building the right kind of lineup. And then with Divine, you can build Quillen, because they also synergize together. He's making reds, and then she's turning reds into skulls. They're both Divine, so they'll both get 40% mana start. So there's a lot of synergy there. But then you just get a lot of really good troops to pick from. Like Mercy's extremely strong, Divinia, as I said, strong, Force Guardian, Quillen. Scrolling down even further, Sister Superior's used in some capacity. Valkyrie's okay. The Devoted you might use early on. She's kind of like a weaker version of Divinia in some capacity. So there's a lot of sick Divine troops in the game. And Divine Ishbala being kind of like the core of what makes a Divine lineup really sing, giving everyone 40% mana start and then making yellow. You'll notice that pretty much all of these people use yellow. So Infernus takes yellow, Queen Aurora takes yellow, Voice of Orpheus is taking yellow, she takes yellow, takes yellow, takes yellow, takes yellow. Even Mercy makes yellow, so Mercy is also turning all purples to yellow. So you can totally see a world where you put Mercy on a team, you put Divine Ishbala on a team, you put Quillen on a team, and then you have your hero with some kind of weapon, and you've already got some skull smacky, instant yellow making, tons of yellow generation. You know, it's already a sick team with just those 3 troops, and I wasn't even trying and put something together, right? So really strong divine troops. The fact that your hero would be divine means you're pretty much stuck with using Divine Ishbala if you want to make the most of it. However, you can make a lot of really good stuff with it. So what that's going to do, as I steal this in there, so I'm actually going to put the Priest as like a higher B tier type class. It actually has a lot more value than it appears, which is actually pretty cool. So now we're going to get to Runepriest. I'm going to accelerate a little bit here since I know there's a lot more classes to go through and I've been talking a lot, but I think we've more or less covered just about all of the talent trees at this point, so I don't have to talk about it too long. All Dwarf allies getting 2 life and attack on 4 or 5, that's kind of cool. You'll be able to pump this up a good amount. The fact that it starts with a Dust Storm is also pretty nice because it synergizes nicely with the Stone Tree as we talked about. So when we're looking at just the talent trees, you can kind of tell we have like a top tier and like a low tier, mid tier kind of tree lineup set up here. So Stone is going to be nice because we're getting a Dust Storm at the start of the game. We have some defensive capability with stunning. We've got the ability to get barriers on browns. We get bonus brown mana. We get the ability to be immune to a lot of different things. So you can see how like this is a very defensive oriented kind of lineup that's specifically trying to work with dwarves. So if we're looking at the class info, it's a dwarf itself, and if we think about what kind of dwarves you can potentially pair this up with, we look at it this way, and there's some cool ones, right? So Bloodhammer is a super cool one. He's doing a lot of skull bashing setup going on. He takes brown himself. Highforge is kind of like the default, all dwarves getting 50% mana. So since Runepriest doesn't get it by default, you might want to be putting a Highforge in your lineup. That's going to give you benefit of getting a 50% mana start. You're also getting the ability to generate more dwarves that will synergize with this. Ironforge by himself is actually a pretty decent troop, so having him in your lineup kind of makes sense, especially if you're trying to build a dwarf lineup. But then you get Gimlet, who's one of my favorites, and he makes brown specifically and instantly, so that's pretty cool. And then you get into these kind of like niche things, so like Apothecary is really useful and very nice. Her starting with 50% mana is also nice. She's also converting whatever you want to brown, so that's also nice. So just between like Gimlet and Apothecary, you'll have all the brown mana you could ever possibly want. The fact that they don't share mana is also pretty useful. So whenever there's like a dwarf event, generally my way of thinking about it is like Apothecary, Gimlet, and then who else can I put in there? Because, you know, Highforge is brown, your hero's probably going to be wanting brown, like Mang is brown, for instance. As far as dwarf troops go, that's kind of like the biggest ones. Deep Boar is kind of interesting. He's creating 9 brown. He's a little resistant, so you can potentially put him at the top of your lineup. He doesn't take brown himself. So as far as Runepriest goes, like they're pretty cool actually. Not the craziest, not the best, but they're definitely pretty cool. So I'm actually going to put them as like a mid B tier over here. Not the worst thing on the planet. Not at all. So that's going to get us to Sentinel. So Sentinel, looking at this, when you see Skull Reduction paired with this leader thing, so obviously you're going to want this guy in the first slot, otherwise what the heck is the point of all this? But then you get 25% barrier at the start, so hero classes can only get up to 40% Skull Reduction, at least so far. So this is actually pretty nice to get. You're going to have a hero that's naturally resilient to skull damage. The fact that they're getting a barrier to a random ally every, 1 out of every 4 turns on average, that's pretty interesting. It seems to imply you would want the game to go on for a little bit to make that useful. When we look at their trees, you can kind of see what I've already told you about these. So like kind of low tier, maybe mid tier, like high tier. So again, the stone tree, this inflicting stun, the fact that you're getting barriers, some bonus brown, the ability to be immune to a lot of stuff. This is a very defensive oriented class. So it's like, because of these traits, you're naturally resistant to skulls, you're getting a little bonus thing, you're potentially just burying people at random. From a defensive setup perspective, this is pretty much the strongest class you can put together. The problem is like it's an Urska class, so there's not like any good Urska, unfortunately. So if we're looking at show me all the Urska, Doomclaw is kind of like situational at best. Like if you have other troops like a High King Irongut for instance, he's way better. You could argue like Bullet is potentially even better, or a Karabos is potentially even better. The fact that it's only a 25% chance to devour, granted it's on potentially 2 people, that's kind of cool, but I can't really build lineups around him. What's kind of nice is that he's enraging, so that synergizes with the Razor Armor trait in the Guardian tree. That'll make you smack like super hard if you happen to have armor on. So there's some synergy there, but in general as far as like a troop, not that great. And he's an Urska, so again it's kind of like why would you care? King Mikhail is like someone that I want to like more. He's doing damage to everybody. He'll probably be enraged because he gains enraged every time you match Browns. He has some level of mana generation, so he's kind of okay, but the Sentinel class is someone you want in the first slot, and this is a guy who kind of wants to be in the first slot too, so there's already some natural not synergy there. This is the guy, however, that's giving everyone their 50% mana start. He's like not that great though, so he has no loop potential. He's doing scatter damage boosted by enrage. It's actually a really nice boost, and a lot of these troops are kind of enrage oriented, so it's not bad to think you might have like 3 to 4 enraged people, but again it's scatter damage, so this isn't going to be noticeably useful until there's like either 1 troop left or maybe 2 troops left. Not that great. But then he's giving everyone 5 attack. Like as far as what he does, he's not that great, so it's kind of like hard to convince me to ever put him in a lineup to try and get the benefit of this 50% mana start. It's just not good enough. But then we're like kind of at the end of the list of useful Urska here. So the fact that the Sentinel class is Urska is unfortunately not adding anything to its utility. However, from like a defensive lineup perspective, it's insanely good. So if you're asking me if this is an event tier list or a delving tier list, this is S class, S tier if you will. However, I'm going to put it as an A tier as far as all of this is concerned. It's extremely defensive, but if you're creating like a skull bashing lineup, it actually brings more to the table than just that, so that's pretty cool. Shaman is somebody that's kind of interesting. So just looking at the traits, we're getting 50% to all Tauros, so that's kind of cool. Not just the hero themselves, but also all other Tauros. So hopefully there's some other cool Tauros we can look at. This is the first time I think we're seeing the war tree, so I'll quickly talk through that. So Ferocity is just 4 attack straight up. That's not terrible. Counterattack is gaining 2 attack whenever you take damage, so I think you can kind of see the theme already, gaining attack. This one-time stat pump is kind of whatever. Gaining 1 extra glory in PvP is kind of just bad. Gaining 3 attack when an enemy dies, this is pretty weak. There's, again, depending on something, dying is not all that useful. Bloodthirsty is getting enraged every 4 or 5. That's actually kind of cool, especially if you're trying to build a very, pump up your attack kind of lineup. The fact that you can self-enrage is pretty nice, because that just means you're going to smack, even harder when you do hit. And then Bull General's, again, you see the word Tauros, so you're like, oh crap, this also synergizes with Tauros, but it's bad. So 1 attack every turn, not very good. So Tauros in general, when we're looking at their trees, I actually do like... all these trees are kind of like mid-tier trees. So we've already talked through light, kind of yellow dependent. It's kind of what it's all about. Forest, however, does bring some really nice stuff. So Urska are not really about summoning so much, so this is not useful there. This is a one-time stat pump, so who cares? You do get Root Trap, which is actually a really high value talent to take, so this is pretty cool. Starting with the Leaf Storm is also noteworthy because there's not a ton of classes that can start with a Leaf Storm. The benefit of Shaman is that it's also potentially looking for green, so you'll see that a lot of troops they work with will take green. So this is pretty cool. Root Trap is also pretty cool. Wall of Vines is one-time stat pump, one-time stat pump, one-time stat pump thing. So it's kind of like nothing else is really that great here. So what you end up creating is like a 50% mana starter with a little bit of utility, and that's pretty much what your Shaman's about. They might get some extra attack, but there's nothing that's like super high tier as far as talents go. So the only thing you're really leaning on is like probably this Root Trap and then maybe the 50% mana start. So then if we look at what they are, again, it's a Tauros from Wild Plains. This weapon's whatever. I wanted to like this weapon just because giving 2 stats to all is pretty nice, but no loot potential, so it's pretty useless, unfortunately. But if we're looking at Tauros, type troops, like who would we potentially have, and I know I need to click this because I don't have this guy. He takes green, so the leaf stuff that I mentioned is nice, but he's also one of the heaviest hitting troops in the game, so he'll just do the massive attack. You'll see this theme across other Tauros where it's doing a boost based on attack, life, and armor in a 2-to-1 ratio. So, granted, I'll look at this guy. So he does the same thing, and if you look at his attack, his armor, and his life, you know, we're getting basically like an extra 30, 25, roughly 20. So that was, 75 damage on top of this. So like he's almost doing 100 damage just like straight up on turn 1. He's also synergizing with other Tauros by giving them all extra stats on every 4 or 5 match. So if you can create a lot of looping, that's going to be really helpful. Ketris, you'll see, does a similar thing where he's gaining even more stats, but only to himself on red matches. So if you can put Stronghorn and Ketris in the same lineup, these two are going to get stat pumping pretty quick, and then really do some sick damage. So that's kind of cool. Oh yeah, he's also divine. So just goes back to that other thing with Priest. He's not yellow though. But beyond all that, there's kind of like no other Tauros that are that interesting. When we had a what was it? When we had an event, Earthcaller was pretty cool. He basically does the exact same thing, attack, life, and armor boosted. Only he was doing it specifically to a boss. His ratio isn't as good as Ketris, of course. I don't think Stronghorns is either. He's a 3-to-1. So all that damage that I was talking about, that was in reference to Ketris. Like, this troop is a 3-to-1, but Ketris is actually a 2-to-1. That's why he hits so stupid hard. I was looking at Stronghorn for his stats. But anyway, as far as Tauros that you'd want to use, that you would care that you're giving 50% mana to, it's kind of like Ketris is the only one. He's the only one in here that you would actually use pretty much at all, unless you had to run a Tauros-specific event. So for that reason, Shaman is kind of like B tier. I'm going to go ahead and put them in like a mid B tier. The fact that he gets the 50% mana start, it's probably going to land you in like about the B tier anyway by default, unless you're bringing a lot of other cool stuff to the table. So that makes sense for those guys. So that's going to bring us to Sorcerer. So Sorcerer, I think, is probably a class that a lot of people believe is good when they first start the game, or like thinks is probably good, but in reality they're not as good as you think. So this is a really nice bonus to get. Bonus purple is very cool. The ability to gain 1 magic half the time, like every turn, this is not good at all, really. Like, there's ways you can magic pump yourself that are way faster than maybe once every other turn. Like, this is pretty bad actually, but it looks like it's good. Like, you think magic pumping is super sick, like that's going to be amazing. In early game it actually is pretty amazing, but like once you get to the mid game, late game, like this is basically useless actually. So not that interesting or exciting, unfortunately. The coolest thing they get from their traits is this magic link, unfortunately. So then when we look at their talents, again, it's kind of a weird mix. So Knowledge Tree is kind of not even worth looking at. But then you're getting somebody who's potentially going to be stealthy, or a Doomstorm. Again, this is like one of those crazy talents where it might work in some lineups, but you need to build very carefully if you ever pick something like this. But it's kind of like the only things that are in here is like stealthy and the 7%. So like that isn't very cool. Like from a talent tree point of view, there's nothing in here that's like, oh yeah, I totally get what they want me to do with this class. The thing that makes you a lot more interested is the fact that it's a demon itself. So the fact that it's a demon itself is something where we can do some kind of interesting stuff. So if we're looking at troop types and we look at demon types, you'll find that there's actually a lot of really cool ones. So demon types, one's worth talking about, I should say. So Elamogram's always pretty cool. Obsidius is actually really great. So he's somebody that, building around demons is kind of cool. But then we get to these two, and these two is where the fact that your hero type would be a demon is more interesting. So she's blessing all demon allies when you cast her ability, and bless, as you may or may not know, is like pretty sick. So it makes you invulnerable to all other negative status effects. It basically makes you immune to all debuffs while you're blessed. So that's super sick. She actually does some pretty decent true damage herself, and then she's summoning a couple other demons if you use her, Wrath and Lust. So Wrath is actually a really nice one to summon into the first slot. Lust is just passively annoying, so it's not the worst thing in the world to summon. But blessing all demons is pretty cool. So the fact that your hero is also a demon makes her pretty cool to add into a lineup, or makes you think about it. Possessed King, again, is getting some synergy from demons, but this boost ratio is so crap that even if you built an all-demon lineup, his damage to all is still going to be like sub 30. So it's not worth trying to build an all-demon lineup to use Possessed King, even though this is my favorite troop in the game. I don't care about this damage at all. Like, if this did 0 damage and just had the transform property, I probably would do nothing different than I do today. Like, I've rarely used the damage to any kind of useful effect. It's like a saving grace, if anything. The transform component is like the only thing that really matters about a spellcast. So that's kind of cool. And then there's just some other cool demons. So like we talked about how Queen of Sin, you'd want to maybe build a lineup around demons, but like Glaceon has super high damage potential and has natural skull resistance and has mana generation, so he's a really high value demon that's there. Gorgotha is pretty cool, but he cleanses himself, so it's kind of like, it doesn't really matter what happens to him as long as he's not silenced. You can always like cure himself, so not necessarily someone that synergizes with Queen of Sin all that much. Karabos is kind of a cheeky person, maybe just devour people. Web Spinner is pretty cool, triple skull damage. Him being blessed is kind of not that useful because whenever you do skull damage, you remove your bless, so you're probably going to be unblessing yourself super often if you use someone like Web Spinner. Wrath, as I mentioned, is very nice. Skull damage and raging, mana generation, that's very cool. Yao is also a demon, so that's also very cool. So Sorcerer being a demon is much more interesting than like anything else that it does. Like, so if Queen of Sin is somebody that you're trying to build around, you might want to do that, but you're not getting 50% mana start, and there's really nothing in here that's getting you 50% mana start, I'm pretty positive. Unless it's like one of these crappier ones that I'm not aware of. I'm like 99% sure, otherwise I would have figured it out by now. Yeah, so the fact that it's a demon is kind of the only interesting thing about it. So unfortunately, the Sorcerer class is just not really bringing much to the table. This is going to put it at like low C tier. The only reason I don't have it in the F tier is that Queen of Sin is like somewhat interesting, and that somewhat synergizes with the Sorcerer. And that's kind of it. It's really close, like honestly. You know what, I gotta put it in F. It's hard to justify. Queen of Sin isn't that great, so it's kind of tough to say it's like a C tier because Queen of Sin exists. I'd argue that Artema is arguably potentially more useful than Queen of Sin would be. Maybe that's not totally true, but in any event. So now we get to the worst class in the game, the Sunspear. The piece of garbage, nobody likes it. How could it ever exist? Just kidding. So this is the best class ever. I'm going to go ahead and spoil this for you. So this is my favorite class in the game. I'm extremely biased, so I'm not going to pretend that people are going to agree with my placement. However, hear me out. So Firestorm at the start of every turn, is really nice because this is going to keep the board favored in your direction with red mana generation, so that's really strong. But then you get to the talent tree, and it's kind of like everything's awesome. So Fire we haven't really reviewed yet, so let's quickly touch it. So one-time sap pump garbage, immune to burning and fairy fire. Sunspear gets this naturally with one of its traits, so it doesn't really matter. Burning a random enemy when someone dies, this is crap. Fire starter, starting with a Firestorm, again, totally redundant because we get this. So far we're like 0 for 4 on this stuff. This is even bad, so 0 for 5. But then we get to this bonus red, so that's actually pretty nice. And you'll notice that at this tier, it's kind of like you can choose between red or blue if you want bonus mana. If you're running Sunspear, you want this. Like, I can never see you picking this. This is what you want. But then, we hit the best, highest tier, level 100 thing I think exists in the game, which is triple skull damage on burning enemies. The nice thing about this existing on Sunspear is that red troops are generally more burn oriented. So if you think of like who's going to be burning people, it's mostly going to be your red troops. Like certainly Infernus is your main go-to. Someone like War burns everybody when you use him. Shagra is a dragon, like burns people randomly. Jarl is also red and he burns people. So you're more than likely going to be trying to get red mana to be doing your damage, and that means that you're going to be burning people that have red mana. You can get them a lot of bonus mana. So it's really, really strong. Like, this is like the highest tier thing I can tell you about. Like, you can build lineups that somehow burn people and then just happen to hit people with skulls and you'll win, even if the lineup is like total crap. So this is like super sick. Then we look at the other ones, and I mentioned before that Force and Water are kind of more utility oriented, so you're freezing someone at the start of a fight, and then you're entangling somebody at the start of a fight. So this is insanely strong. Being immune to Frozen is also pretty cool, so you're immune to Burning, Fairy Fire, and Frozen, just between the talents and the traits, so that's pretty nice. This is the only level, really, that kind of sucks. Like, you'll never start with a Leaf Storm, because we start with a Firestorm. You already start with a Firestorm, and you're probably not going to be using blue allies. And if you do, they're only getting 4 life. So level 20 is the worst. But all the way up to level 10, you're already getting like sick stuff. Like, freezing someone and entangling someone at the start of a fight is super strong. This puts you in such an advantaged state that you can win with really bad lineups just because you have these two things active at the same time. So that part's super strong. And this is also really nice because submerging yourself, and it's all allies, like you can submerge a random ally on 4 or 5 matches, this is super strong as well. So this is more of a defensive utility kind of thing. So when it comes to PvP and Guild Wars, there's no question in my mind I will fight you in the streets. Sunspear is the best class in the game, by far, no question, hands down, don't at me, etc. So that's kind of what makes this class like sick. The worst part about this class is this part. Like, Raksha, it's like, who gives a crap about this? No one gives a crap about this. So, super red mana, super awesome utility. That's really cool. So now, what can we do with the Sunspear class, right? I wrote an entire guide about this, so I won't bore you too much because I could sit here and gush. Holy crap. All these sorts of being like reordered, it messes me up so bad. So red mana is the theme of Sunspear, right? Like, the fact that it's Raksha matters literally not at all. There is no Raksha you're going to care to put with this thing. So all you're caring about is burning. So Infernus is a S tier mythic and Sunspear is an S tier class in my mind, and they work beautifully together. So burning all enemies on 4 or 5 matches means you match 1 4 or 5 match, and now every skull you do is triple damage. Disgusting, sick, totally amazing. Damage is nice, mana generation is there. An S tier mythic with an S tier class is just kind of busted. They work so well together, I can't even tell you. All the mana that you're generating as a result of Infernus is more than likely going to be red. He's red himself. You're causing firestorms constantly. You're getting bonus red mana, so you're filling everybody up super fast every single time you cast Infernus. And then when you look at other people that synergize with it, Obsidius is also a very high tier mythic. He's red. He's stunning everybody on 4 or 5, so if you happen to run Infernus and Obsidius in the same lineup, everybody's burning and stunned. They're both looping. They're both hitting multiple people. Also really sick. The only thing to watch out for with him is that he's causing a dust storm when an enemy dies, which means like if you're looping a lot within the same turn, it'll stay brown for quite a while, but then once it's your next turn, it'll go back to red. So that's kind of useful. But then you also have someone like Phoenicia, highest like damage potential in the game. This boost by red gems and burning enemies just means that if you put like Infernus and Phoenicia on the same team, everyone's going to be burning. There's going to be a crap ton of red mana on the board. The amount of damage she's going to do to everybody, since it's doubled if there's a Firestorm, and since we're a Sunspear, there will be. This damage could be up as high as like 80 to all. Like, doing 80 damage to one is really nice, but 80 damage to all can be busted. So the only thing that's balancing this troop herself, and of course she burns people randomly herself too, the only thing that balances this troop is the fact that she has no loop potential whatsoever. If she did, she would easily be the best troop in the game. Her damage potential is just so sick. So she's like pretty much the only class that runs well with her is Sunspear. So that's pretty cool. Worldbreaker again kind of functions like Infernus. He's giving you tons of mana generation, damage to all. All the mana that's coming back down is going to be red. I don't want to spend too much time on this because I can literally talk about Sunspear for hours. But my opinion and my strong opinion is that red mana generation as strong as this, the fact that it gets bonus red mana, the fact that it's always going to be a Firestorm, the fact that a lot of super high tier mythics are all red, and if you can do burning to people, it does triple skull damage. You start out with that freeze and that entangle. It's the best class. Like, the only thing it's not the best at is events and delves. So you could argue, but Keylime, that means it can't be S tier because it's not as good at events or delves. Well, I would also argue that Frostmage is no good at events or delves, so it's not really a fair comparison to make. There's really only one or two classes that are good for events or delves. Spoilers, it's Titan and Sentinel. But it's kind of like, the fact that they aren't the best at those specific things is not a reason to not put them in the S tier. It's also the reason why I don't have High King Iron Gut as my S tier mythic, for instance, because he's only useful in events and delves. Much more of this game is going to be spent outside of events and delves. And in all of those situations that aren't events and delves, Sunspear is going to be the best class you could possibly run. So that's my very biased opinion. This is probably the opinion that people might fight me on the most, but it is the one that I believe in the most strongly. So yeah, that's the Sunspear class, the first S tier in the list. So that's going to bring us to Thief. So Thief is kind of sneaky. What they can do is kind of interesting. So looking at these, there's already some pretty cool stuff that is in here. So gaining 2 gold on 4 or 5, that sounds weak, but you'll see that there's some synergy with a lot of these types of troops that need gold. So, and a lot of them will have this. So when you're getting 4 or 5 matches, you'll tend to accumulate gold pretty quick with these types of troops. Rogue type, that is. Starting with 50% mana is pretty nice, and this like constant passive 7 damage to the last enemy on 4 or 5 is also pretty cool. So just from like a pure trait perspective, we're already looking at somebody that's pretty interesting like right away. I'm already like intrigued as to what's going on with this class. So then we look at the talents. Hunt is actually, and actually this is a new tree we need to cover. Cunning is actually a very cool tree, but Hunt is actually like a top tier level 1 talent to have. So Hunter's Mark, if you're not familiar, anyone that's Hunter's Mark is taking double skull damage. So the fact that you can just passively put this on people just by playing the game is really, really cool. This is going to make your team lineups really, really strong. Whether you're building around skull damage or not, you're going to passively find skulls all the time. And this is going to make you whack those people super hard. So that's pretty cool. Wind Tree we already covered is garbage, so sticking with Cunning for a second here. Passive one-time stat bump is kind of garbage. 5 gold every turn is kind of whatever. If your options are yellow people getting 10% mana or 20% to summon when an enemy dies, I'm going to take the 5 gold every turn. There's nothing really strong here. To me, this is the most like synergistic and useful. Again, you get another summoning thing, so 35% chance to summon a bandit when an ally dies, so I'm sure you've run into that before. I can't stand summoning lineups myself, so if I'm showing you a talent tree lineup, it's almost always going to be from an offensive perspective. But creating a Dark Storm at the start of battle is pretty cool. You can do a lot more interesting stuff with that offensively, in my mind. It's stealthy, so that's pretty cool. And then Goblin getting a 2 attack here back to the Cunning tree is, again, one-time stat pump, not that great. Skull dodging is pretty cool, 30% to dodge skull damage. I don't really recommend running Thief in the first slot. The fact that it's stealthy would seem to imply you're trying to prevent it from getting hit, so having something that, granted it does prevent it from getting hit, but it puts it in the line of fire. This will give it a little extra survivability, but it doesn't have any other kind of defensive capability beyond these 2 things, so it's kind of tough to say, yeah, go ahead and throw them in the first slot and just hope they don't take skull damage. If you're taking stealthy, to me, that means you're trying to put them somewhere else, but this does at least enable you to put them in the first slot, and it's not the worst thing in the world. But to me, to get the most benefit out of this, you need to put them not in the first slot, and this is, to me, arguably better or more interesting than this. So you're getting dodge, which is overall a really nice talent to take. I just don't think it fits super well with these. However, granted, if my options are 25% to, summon somebody or poisoning somebody or 30%, I'm probably going to take this anyway. But then we get down to here, and again, you get the 7% to assassinate. So 7% to assassinate, as we said, is very cool. It's just kind of this value add. You don't really think about it too much. It's just there. If it triggers, it's awesome. But then all rogues gaining 1 magic on 4 or 5, so like this is theoretically cool. Having some kind of ability to do loot potential and have rogues gaining magic with stat pumping, pretty cool. Unfortunately, there's not like a ton of awesome rogues, However, this class in general is overall pretty cool, just looking at what it brings to the table. Hunt is extremely strong, stealthy is very nice, dodge is kind of cool. The fact that it has like a more useful version of a stat pumping thing is pretty cool, but you're probably going to be taking this, which is also a very high tier thing. So starting with 50% mana, passively damaging the last person on the board, constantly getting gold. When I click this, you're going to think it's a rogue type, right? That would make sense, but it's a goblin type. So goblin is there, which makes it a little more weird. So obviously there's a lot of cool goblin synergy in general, so this guy being a goblin is kind of cool, but admittedly you don't really need to put him in a goblin lineup. PS, if you don't have this skull key thing, get one. It's very nice. So if we're looking at goblins, I think we need to actually look at goblins and rogues to really analyze this class as well as we should. So we'll start with goblins. While there's cool goblins in here, what you really want to be paying attention to is what goblins synergize nicely with other goblins. So this guy, for instance, nothing seems obvious, but he's actually able to summon other goblins, so it seems to imply we need to find somebody that can do something cool with goblins, and we kind of find it here. So she can do some cool stuff. She's either giving 20 points to a random skill to a random ally, but you get double that if it's a goblin. So if this is plus 40 to somebody, like plus 40 magic, plus 40 attack, plus 40 health, like having a Princess Fizzbang, on your team gives you the potential to do some crazy stuff. The only thing that's not so great about her is that sometimes you want the explosion, sometimes you want the stat pumping. You don't get to pick which one actually happens, but the nice thing about every goblin troop type minus your hero, they get an extra turn by default. So the class weapon even has that ability kind of built into it. If you kill someone, you get an extra turn, so it thematically fits. But she's pretty much like the best goblin person. If you're building a goblin specific lineup without her in it, it kind of feels like you're not doing it right. She makes the most sense. Beyond all of that, there's nothing else that's especially interesting. Obviously High King Iron Gut's amazing, but the fact that he's a goblin doesn't really help the class being a goblin. So the rest of this stuff with the class that we just talked about was more seeming to indicate that it fits nice with rogue types. I'm sorted by base rarity here, and you can see that like the highest I'm showing is epic. I don't think there's any legendary rogues at all. Am I just not having some? Nope, that's literally, there's none. So rogue types, there's really nothing all that amazing. However, there are some cool people here that are rogue type that are deceptively good. So Bonnie Rose, for instance, she's just like a single shot nuker. So she's gaining 15 gold when you use her, and then she just does a shot that will basically do a ton of damage. So based on all the gold you have, 2-to-1 ratio. So like in just one shot with her, if you have some way of generating extra gold, you could just do stupid sick damage with her. There was a lot of cheap, cheesy lineups that were doing stuff like that. So the people that like generally are used to help with your gold generation, someone like Cedric, so he's like 100% bonus gold from battle. So having him in your lineup is obviously a very cool thing to do. That was what people were doing that with, putting him in your lineup just for that. And then you have like the ultimate gold making dude. Of course, there's people. So he starts with full mana. He's gaining bonus gold on 4/5s, but then he just gives you like a straight up shot of gold. So my dude's got 60 health. When I cast him, he's giving me gold equal to my health. So just by having him in my lineup, crap ton of gold right away. And you can cast it turn 1. Then you can synergize it with people like Egg Thief, who's destroying a bunch of gems based on the amount of gold that you have, so that's kind of cool. She's actually a pretty valuable troop. You've probably run her or seen her in the Skeleton Key team lineup, so that's kind of cool. Leprechaun's pretty high value, but there's nothing really gold about him besides the fact you get gold by casting him, but he fits very nicely in rogue type lineups or gold dependent kind of lineups, so that's pretty interesting. But yeah, that's like from a gold team perspective, that's kind of the stuff that you can do. But of course the best thing about that there is our skeleton key. So did not expect that many things to pop up when I type in key. Skeleton key. So just it's a 2-to-1 boost ratio of the amount of gold that you have. So if you have Cedric in your lineup, or you have anybody else that's generating gold very quickly, this thing's going to hit 2 people for a ton of damage, and if you kill one, you get an extra turn. So, arguably, Thief is very useful from that perspective, more so than other things. I think the gold aspect of Thief is more important to the Thief class than the actual Goblin part of it. The only Goblin synergy we're really getting is with Princess Fizzbang, and that's about it. There's a lot more like universal potential with this gold lineup building kind of stuff. So then when it comes to like the class overall, it's kind of like, it's very cool because 50% mana start is very strong. This passive damage dealing thing is pretty great. The fact that it's stealthy is pretty cool. The fact that it gets hunt is pretty nice. Some level of stat pumping for rogues is okay. Thief class overall is actually pretty great. Like it doesn't make you busted in any capacity, but it does make you pretty cool. So I'm going to go ahead and put Thief at the top of the B tier. It's pretty darn nice. So that's going to bring us to Tidecaller. So Tidecaller is actually pretty cool. So this is the newest class that was introduced, and from a traits perspective, I'm already interested. Less so because of this, and much more so because of this. So when we saw the Storms tree, we noticed that every 4 or 5 match you would get an explosion on a yellow gem. Well, this one by default with its traits is getting that ability, only it's exploding a blue gem. What's a little more interesting about this versus the Lightning Strike version is that you're more than likely going to be creating blue mana somehow. Just the way this class kind of works, and you'll see that in a little bit. So there'll always be a blue on the board. In a super rare occasion, there'll be no yellows on the board, and actually when I'll trigger that storm, the lightning strike ability in the storm tree, I won't get any explosion, or it'll be an explosion like at the top left of the board, which is kind of useless. This is a lot more interesting because you're more likely to get some value out of that, and the fact that you get it for free as a trait is pretty nice. Not literally free, but you know, basically by default it's pretty cool. And then from a talent tree perspective, you probably see a few that I'm very interested in. So Arcane is very nice, Water is very nice, and Life is very nice. And what kind of works out nicely is that the talents kind of miss each other. So like the cool stuff that you want in each tree is kind of not in competition with other stuff, I find. So Snap Freeze is very nice as a first level talent, and these are not so great, so it's easy to pick this one. When we look at the next level, Immunity to Frozen is pretty nice, but the ability to cleanse yourself whenever you want is better, and this is useless, so we get to take this one. Level 10, being reduced damage from spells by 20% is very nice. This isn't that great, it's pretty slow, and this is pretty garbage, so we take this, and it's not in competition with anything, so that's pretty cool. So these are all nice up to here. Then we get to 50% mana start, so that's really great. We already said that this one's not that great and this one's not that great, so we get to take this one. It's not really in competition with anything. This is one where there's a little bit of competition, but in my mind not really. I would much rather take Deluge over Healing Herb, so submerging anyone on my team on every 4 or 5 match is pretty great. This gaining 4 life when gaining green is, again, like a pretty cool thing, but this class isn't built around getting green mana so much, so it's kind of hard to try and favor this. You could, because theoretically in the next level you get to pick whichever color you want and you get bonus mana to that, so you get bonus purple, you get bonus green, or you get bonus blue. That's super strong, and you get to pick whichever one you want. So even though these are all directly in competition with each other, what in reality it is you get to pick which one makes the most sense for the team that you're building it in. So theoretically, if you pick this Healing Herb one, you'd more than likely be picking this Nature's Will to go with it. If you're picking this Submerging Random Ally, admittedly it doesn't really affect which one of these ones you pick. So that's really cool as well. Even these aren't really in competition with each other, it's more that they all have different synergies based on how you pick them. And then finally at level 100, there's really nothing interesting there. So from an overall talent and trait perspective, we're getting that extra loot potential with the exploding a blue on 4/5s. We're freezing somebody right away. We can cleanse ourselves. We start with 50% mana. We're a little bit spell resistant. We're submerging people. Getting bonus mana to whatever we want. Like, this is actually all really, really strong. So overall, this class is actually pretty nice. It's a very different feel than all the other classes, which is kind of interesting. That's what makes me like it, I think, more than anything. The weapon is pretty garbage, don't worry about that. The fact that it's merfolk is also not especially noteworthy. Nothing about it is synergizing with merfolk by default. Thematically it kind of is, by the fact that it submerges itself, but if we look at the other types of merfolk, down here, you'll see that there's some pretty cool ones. So Megavore obviously is very cool, and he thematically fits, he submerges himself, but he's not necessarily like doing anything with other merfolk. This guy is kind of getting some synergy based on merfolk, so Undyne, if you have him. He's doing a decent amount of damage to 2 people, but it's getting boosted by submerged allies and merfolk. So he seems to fit the best with the fact that your hero is going to be a merfolk, because the hero is going to be submerging himself by default. He's also a merfolk, so you're getting times 18 from just that. So the damage he's going to be doing is pretty great, but if you're building an all merfolk lineup, this actually can do some pretty solid damage to 2 people. And then if you happen to be up against blue people, you'll silence them all. So on Guild Wars Blue Defense Day, this is kind of like your top tier troop. You would more than likely want to build a Tidecaller specific Undyne type troop lineup for your Blue Defense Day. That's going to be the best value. So that's pretty cool. But beyond all of that, there's nothing else that's really like super synergistic with merfolk. Like, I don't think they have like a merfolk queen or something like that that's giving everyone 50% mana start or anything like that. I feel like I would have known this by now if it did exist. Let's see if there's a 40. No. So there's nothing quite like that. But there are some troops that do get, again, some benefit from the fact that there's other merfolk in the lineup. So the Deep King is also an interesting guy. He's just, again, submerging himself, but he's okay. Like, the fact that he's giving all merfolk 3 attack on 4 or 5 matches, that's pretty cool. There's a little bit of synergy there, so your hero would be getting 3 attack on 4 or 5 matches. Merfolk are kind of interesting. Azora's a nice one, but again, there's nothing really useful because you're a merfolk. She just is another one, so she's someone that you can potentially build into lineups with these other people to get more synergy. So overall, I think that puts the Tidecaller in like a very interesting space. I think it's really good, and I debate if I want to put it here or if I want to put it here. And I think I'm tempted actually to put it here. It is very good. It has that 50% mana start. It has a lot of really good utility talents. It has that explosion. It's pretty cool. Oh man, this is so tough. It might be top of the B tier. I might put it there. I'm so torn. I'm gonna leave it there because it's new and it's shiny. That makes me want to put it there. This gets us to Titan. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this. I think you know it's S tier. I know it's S tier. I have to put it ahead of my Sunspear. I have to put my bias to the side a little bit. But you probably know this already, but I'll quickly review why. So all giants getting 50% mana start. That's obviously great. This is a giant itself, so that's very cool. And then we get to the talent trees, and you get some really sick ones. So inflicting stun when you get hit with a skull is really nice. Some ability to gain attack is very nice. There's really nothing good at this level, but pick whichever one is the most useful to you. At level 20, you get the ability to start with a Dust Storm, which is actually super nice with the Stone Tree. So the Stone Trees that we've reviewed before, it was Stone without Storms. So now we get Stone with Storms. So the fact that you can start with the Dust Storm means that since we want brown mana so badly as a Stone Tree because of this barriers on browns, this is going to help you get it even faster. So these synergize super nicely together. And then we get this exploding yellow on 4/5s, which I was just bragging about on the Tidecaller class. So this is going to help your loot potential, so it's really, really nice. And then you can make yourself immune to a bunch of stuff. So pretty much at every level, minus 10, you're getting something that's extremely noteworthy. Maybe not so much at 5, but at 5 and 10, not so great, but then everything after that is very, very, very useful. And they're arguably some of the best things in the game. It's starting with 50% mana. It's getting barriers on browns. You're able to start with a Dust Storm to get your barriers up faster. You're getting extra loot potential with Lightning Strike. You're immune to a lot of very bad things. It's just good. It's just good. It's just good at everything. And it's a giant type troop. So if we look at other giants that it synergizes with, sorry, I'm still getting used to these new sort orders. As far as giant troops, so Hindla super good, pumps all giants by magic and life by 2 every 4 or 5, so putting her in a lineup with your hero means he gets magic pumping, life pumping, super good. Jarl's pretty cool because he has really decent mana generation himself. He's also giant, so he'll be getting 50% mana start if you put him in a lineup with your Titan. So these two are pretty cool. This guy's getting extra boost based on giant allies and barriered allies. He's making barriered allies himself. So this boost is actually really, really, really good as well. So him being on your Titan lineup means that his like true shot dart throw that he does, javelin throw, is going to hit that much harder. So that's pretty cool. All the troll types are very good. So these are the people that double the amount on the board and then create 3 more. So as long as you get the board looking a certain kind of way and you cast one of these, you'll get everybody that needs that mana full right away. So having these guys all start with 50% mana is really, really strong. It's kind of the end of the list from that point of view, but Titan, the reason it's just the best overall is that whether you're running events, whether you're running PvP, whether you're running delves, it's just going to be good at everything. The fact that it can barrier itself whenever you need to with the brown mana is extremely strong. You'll start with 50% mana, so that means you can start pretty quick. It also helps out some decent troops in here with their 50% mana start as well. But then it's also getting that extra loop potential with the lightning strike. So, and you're immune to a bunch of stuff. So if you have no idea what class you want to use and you're just starting out, or you're like in an event and you're torn on what class was going to make the most sense, or you're trying to PvP and you're not sure what kind of class you want to put in there, like 90% of the time, if you pick Titan, you're not going to be wrong. It's going to be effective in one way or another. It just kind of fits in every single lineup. It's not trying to do anything fancy. It's just really good at a lot of stuff. It's the Titan. It's your boy. So that's the Titan. Again, I don't want to spend too much time because I think we all just know it's really good. Warden, so less fun. This is kind of like a big drop off from Titan. All of these traits are pretty bad. I don't want to talk about them too much, but there's really nothing that great here, so this kind of sucks. And then we get to its talent tree, and then we get some stuff that's kind of cool. So Forest Tree and Cunning Tree bring some interesting stuff. So if you're building a summon heavy lineup, maybe you'd want this. I never do, so I'm never picking this, but Hunt, as we mentioned, is very strong. So 4 or 5 matches doing... the Hunter's Mark is very good. You'll be doing a lot of extra skull damage. At this level, there's really nothing good at all. At level 10, the Root Trap is very, very nice. Maybe this would be useful, but probably not. Or you could argue to take a barrier at the start of a battle. Admittedly, I'd rather take an Entangle. The first thing you're going to get hit by in a game is more often than not going to be a skull. What's also worth noting is that you can do a little bit of AI abuse here. This isn't like hacking or something, but like the skulls, when the enemy sees them on the board, can't help themselves but to match them. So what that really means is that if you have Root Trap up and you leave skulls on the board, you can focus on taking mana instead of matching those skulls, because you know that when they match the skulls, it's not really going to do anything. This barrier at the start of the battle is obviously very nice. It'll protect you from spells, but it's kind of like a once and done kind of thing. Whereas this Entangle, you could potentially get like 3 or 4 or 5 shots like protected just because of this, versus this is going to help you once. So I'd argue between these two, this is probably going to be effective more often than not. The only difference there would be like in events, and in events this would obviously be way better, but in PvP Guild Wars type scenario, this is going to be better. At level 20, the Leaf Storm is pretty nice. This is one of the few classes that if you're trying to build that Essence of Evil style lineup, this is going to help you out a lot. So this is pretty cool. And then once we get down here, things get a little less fun. So I hate all of these, not good. Banishment is actually pretty nice, and Dodge is actually pretty nice. So at level 70, you get some minor utility, and then there's really nothing good down here. So it kind of puts us in a weird spot where I like this is cool, I like this is cool, I like this is cool, but I'd have no reason to really level it up unless I want Banishment, or like obviously having these will be good, but it's not obvious like how I want to build this class. Like it seems like I would want a green mana oriented skull damage kind of lineup is the best way to do this, which immediately makes you think of the best synergizing person with this from the beast side, as we will see. So what did I say? We need a skull damage dealing green guy. Let's find out if one of those exists. This They do. Ta-da! And he's giving all beasts 50% mana start, so that's pretty sick. He's transforming purples to skulls and then turning browns to green. So he's creating green mana. All allied beasts gain barrier. Your hero type's going to be barrier. He's doing skull damage. You have hunt on, so you're doing double skull damage. The other enemy's entangled, so they're not doing skull damage. You're making even more green. There's a leaf storm going. So like, if you're running Warden and you're not running Forest Guardian, like you're not doing it right. Like you're really not using that class in a way that it probably should. Like I would argue, if you're not using Forest Guardian, then you pretty much should probably be running Shaman, like maybe Archer. But yeah, that's what you need to be doing. So Warden, by default, you kind of have to be using Forest Guardian. He just does everything that the Warden class is trying to do. But then if we try and think of other troops that are useful with beasts, that's where we kind of run into a problem. So if you have to be running Forest Guardian, you get Queen Aurora, who's a very good troop who is also a beast type. It doesn't barrier itself naturally with this ability, it's everybody else. So if you have Forest Guardian, it's burying everybody, and then you have Queen Aurora, who's also burying everybody and giving health and generating mana. These two together feel pretty strong, so that's pretty cool. Wolfgarok, you would hope, is useful to beasts, but he's not. He's only useful to Wargear. He's only boosted by Wargear, so even though he's a beast himself, he'll get the benefit of Queen Aurora, or not Queen Aurora, Forest Guardian. So he'll get benefit there, but he's not getting boosted by anything else. So him being a beast is only useful, again, if you pair him up with Forest Guardian. Quillen is somebody that you can get mana either by running him with the Divine Ishbala since he's divine, or with Forest Guardian since he's a beast. He's also a Skull Converter. The only thing that doesn't work with him so well with Forest Guardian is that this person's taking the browns and turning them into green. This person's taking the browns and trying to turn them into skulls. So if you cast this one, there's no more brown on the board, and then if you cast this one, it's kind of like all the browns that you want are now gone. So these two don't play well together, despite the fact that they do play well together, if that makes sense. Their spells don't, but their like traits do. And that's kind of like it. I mean, I'll quickly mention that Willow exists, so all beasts get 2 attack and life on 4 or 5. The mana generation and the damage part, however, is not that great. Like, the damage isn't atrocious, but since it's only a ×3 boost based on brown gems, this is only destroy. You're probably going to get like 1 to 3 brown gems in a row at any given time. So like at most this is going to be doing 30 some odd damage to everybody. Nothing to sneeze at, but the mana generation is so low. This trait isn't the best either. It's not the worst, but it would imply that you need to have so much looping to get a lot of benefit out of this. So it's hard for me to recommend Willow. So again, if you're running Warden class, you need to be running Forest Guardian. Like, otherwise there's another class that you probably should be running instead. So where that ends up putting Warden in my mind is probably like down here, maybe? Yeah, that feels right. I kind of like that better. I'm going to do that also. That's been bothering me. Yeah, that's still... I'm seeing if I want to readjust any of that other stuff. I have no idea how long this video is, by the way, but it feels like it's really, really, really long. So I apologize if it is. So Warlord. Warlord here is gaining 3 attack whenever you do skull damage. So this scales, but it doesn't scale nearly as fast. Like, if you're doing that much skull damage, it's kind of hard to imagine you wouldn't have started killing people by now, unless like your attack started at 0. But if it had started at 0, why would we be using this class? This isn't as cool as I think it looks. If this was like gain 10 attack every time you do skull damage, like that would be a lot more interesting. I still don't know if it would get me to look at it too hard. If this was like plus 20 attack every time you do skull damage, that would actually be sick. Like, I would love this class. But 10 is not enough, or 3 is not enough, and 10 is not enough. So like 20 I think is like about where the line is of where I would start to care about this. He does have other ways of building his attack, as you'll see. He's getting 1 right here, so every time he takes damage or does skull damage, he's gaining attack. If we look at his talents, of course, he has the War, so he's gaining 4 attack there. He's gaining 2 attack whenever he takes damage. So he's actually gaining 3 attack whenever he takes damage, since of the traits in there. So he's getting tons of attack, but then He can also enrage himself, which is very, very nice. So that's pretty cool. But then he gets Fireblade, which is kind of sick. So, like, he has tons of ways of building up his attack, which is kind of nuts. And then he also then gets triple skull damage. So, like, on a Sunspear, which I just sang from the rafters for, I talked about how sick this was and how amazing it was. Sunspear doesn't really build up its attack at all, but it's still like almost one-shotting, if not one-shotting everybody with just any skull damage. This guy has like a trillion ways to get his attack up, and then he does triple skull damage. So like that's pretty crazy, but it's almost like overkill. Like this class is so built around getting attack, like its traits do it, its talents do it. But the Fireblade, it's like, this is amazing, do not get me wrong, like this is obviously amazing, but it's so much overkill. Like you do not need all of that attack building and then just happen to then also kill people that are burning. It kind of puts you in a weird spot where you're not sure where to build this character. It doesn't have like any utility at all. It's all built around getting your hero as like damage dealing as you can. Like the morale class is all these minor little bumps, gaining 2 stats here, like getting 5 attack versus 4 attack, like that's something you can do, but it only is useful in PvP. These things are like, they'll burn someone if like an ally dies. This is crap, but it's like up against 2 other crap things. Starting with a Firestorm is pretty cool, but it's only for that one, the first 8 turns. None of these are all that great. So it's kind of like, it's weird. This class is very weird. If you like doing really high attack damage, like there's probably troops you would want to be using to build up your attack even faster than this class would be able to do it by himself. But then once you get to the level 100 part, triple skull damage is kind of like, it feels so crazy. It's like you just gave like a bazooka to the Rock. Like, the Rock could already kill you if you wanted to, but now you gave him a bazooka on top of it. Like, why? Like, it just seems crazy. Giving a bazooka to like, Christ, this is the worst analogy ever. Some smart villain instead, like Mysterio, I guess, would make him a lot more interesting. Like, he already does a lot of cool things, and now he also can shoot you with a bazooka. That's what this feels like. That would make a more interesting class. Giving the Rock a bazooka is what this class is. Giving Mysterio a bazooka is what Sunspear is. Like, it's just, I hope that makes any sense to you. I also feel like I'm getting delirious because I've been recording this for a while, it feels like. So again, very cool, but it feels like if building attack was the thing you wanted to do, and then to get the triple skull damage, you would probably do it with like a troop to get him that attack versus having a class that's so trying to do things to get attack. And the attack is built up too slow, which is a problem. So we already reviewed the giants that are there, but since this dude is actually all about building attack, let's actually look at that. So we're going to look at troops that have a increased stat thing. Hopefully most of these will be doing attack, since I'm putting the word attack in there. So someone like the Wild Queen, for instance, she's going to get you 29 attack right away. So if you put your dude in that first slot and you're running Wild Queen, in one cast of Wild Queen, she's getting way more benefit than all of those talents and traits that we just looked at in a single cast. So that's what I'm talking about. Like, there was no need to build an entire class around getting that much attack, like, kind of slowly, versus someone who can just, boom, there's a bunch of attack, have at it, and then creates a bunch of skulls for you to use it. Way more interesting than, like, the Warlord class. Chief Dragoon again, or Dargon, sorry, is giving 24 attack to himself and everyone below him, and he's got a little bit of mana generation, and he's a really good frontliner, whereas Warlord is not. Warlord has no defensive capabilities. This is, again, kind of like way better at giving yourself attack if that's what you were after. You didn't need to waste all those talents and trees to do it. So again, it's kind of weird. I don't necessarily know if I want to get into all of these, but I think the punchline I've got with Warlord class is that I'm not going to tell you it's bad. Like, I know for a fact that it is good, but it's actually not good because it doesn't do anything else. And doing just raw attack damage like that and scaling it can be done with anyone else who has triple skull damage and can potentially be doing it faster. So unfortunately, that's really going to bring this class down a decent amount. So as far as the Warlord goes, I'm actually going to put it at like a higher C tier, but overall could be much better. So that's going to bring us to Warpriest. Sorry, I feel like that Warlord rant like drained me a good amount. So Warpriest is pretty interesting looking at just this. So we get 40% skull reduction, so frontliner, and the ability to stun a random enemy at the start of your turn half the time. So this is not awesome, but it's not terrible. Stun is more interesting of a talent to have, or a debuff to put on the enemy, I should say. That's pretty cool, but it's not that cool. It's not super reliable, so I can't build a lineup around, I hope I'm going to stun somebody. It's just something that you're getting like a flavor benefit for, so it could be potentially useful, but not something you can build a lineup around. Skull reduction is much more useful. It's passive, it's happening all the time. This is much more beneficial. So we go down to the talents, and again we have this like attacky building thing. This is not the one that has Fireblade in it, that's the Fire Tree. So nothing super great, nothing super great, nothing super great. So from a talent tree perspective, there's nothing super great kind of anywhere in here. So unfortunately, what you really kind of get is a hero that is kind of good. Like you're building up your attack, you're getting some extra stats. That's kind of it. So nothing all that special. It's a human type, so again, there's really nothing all that special. As we reviewed before, it's like Holy Saint Astra's kind of the human super troop there. So it kind of puts Warpriest in a weird spot. Like, it's actually not awful, but it's not that great. I like the 40% reduction, but overall it's not as good as it potentially could be. I'm sorry I'm like going through this one pretty quick. I just want to make this video not 6 hours long. It feels like it belongs down here. Probably I'll put it just under Warlord after, despite that massive rant I just had. 40% skull reduction is pretty cool. I do like this. Like, it's a very yellow focused. Whenever you see the light, that means it's very yellow focused. You're getting bonus yellow. It's starting with a light storm. So if there's a team that you want to run where you have a hero on your first slot that's kind of yellow mana dependent, this might be a class you want to look at. But in general, I don't think you're going to get a ton of value out of that. I want to like this more, but if this was like 100% stunning somebody on every 4 or 5, or if this was 100% stunning somebody at the start of your turn, that would be a little better. Though every 4 or 5 would be way better, but there's Emperor Korvash if you're more interested in that. This is okay. It's not that great though, so I'd put it in like a mid-C tier. That sounds about right. Then we're going to get downtown to the Archer class. So Archer's pretty interesting, and if you've been playing this game for a long time, I imagine you have this class at 100. Archer, I believe, when it first came out, was like the bee's knees forever ago. So, and it's still kind of the bee's knees here, so it's starting with 50% mana, so that's pretty nice. This is actually kind of nuts, where 15% of the time, just any time you do skull damage, it's going to kill somebody. Like, obviously, if you're building a skull damage lineup, that's kind of crazy. So the fact that you can just potentially just kill someone straight up is pretty cool. So that's already making this more interesting. And then when we look at its talents, that's kind of where things get a little less interesting. So this is very nice where you can tell, again, it's a very skull damage oriented type class, because we get Hunt, which means all of the skulls are doing double damage, even if they don't just kill them randomly. At a minimum, you're going to be doing almost like double damage every single time. So that's really nice. And then you get Root Trap, which means that the other team is already struggling to try and do anything with skulls back to you. So that's also very cool. So you're doing crazy skull damage with Hunt, and then the other team can't do skull damage at all, and you might just be killing them with skulls. So if you're putting together a skull bashing kind of lineup, this class is also pretty cool. You also get Dodge, which also makes it like more resilient against skull damage on top of it. So once your Entangle wears off, now you're leaning on your Dodge to potentially just straight up dodge skulls. It also has the ability to start with a Leaf Storm. So it's one of the few classes, again, that starts with a Leaf Storm. So if doing skull damage is at all what you're interested in, this is kind of the class for you. It's an elf type, which makes it less fun. Unfortunately, there's not like a ton of really cool elves. We kind of reviewed those when we went over the Orbweaver. However, from like a troop point of view, again, really what you're after is like more skull-oriented kind of people. So to look at those folks, really what you want to do is spell effect convert. We'll do that by base rarity. We'll just say the word skull. These are kind of like your skull converter-y type folks. People that are green are probably the most synergistic, so someone like Nemu is very, very nice. She's not doing anything with greens per se, but she has green, she'll take green. Forest Guardian again is in here, who's doing green, converting into green, and then creating barriers, at least for himself at a minimum. If you happen to have other beasts, they'll get 50%. We've got Alderfather in there, which is a lot more interesting. He also synergizes kind of nice. Because he's entangling a random enemy whenever you're matching purples. So you get that normal entangle, you get these extra entangles, you're building skull lineups. Building a skull lineup with purple people, I'm sorry, not purple people. That sounded racist for some reason in my mind. With purple people. With these kinds of green troops is the best, most synergistic thing you can do. Keeper of Souls is actually pretty cool because you can force where you want that skulls to go. You can pick the color. It's not Doom Skulls, but it is pretty cool. So yeah, that's the archer class. It's actually really nice from, if you're going for a skull conversion kind of lineup, get someone tanky that can sit in the front. Someone like a Glaceon can potentially do that. Looking at the rest of these, there's not really anyone else. Wrath isn't so much tanky, but he at least every time he does skulls, he blows up the board a little bit. So this can do some pretty fun stuff. But yeah, that's kind of like, as far as skull converters specifically, Glaceon's probably the best one, but he's not green. So you'd want somebody that converts into purples, which means you kind of want this person who's turning stuff into purples. They both share purple at that point in time. I'm like building teams as I talk out loud at this point. But if I was an archer, you kind of want your archer in the first slot. So Glaceon, not as interesting to put as... I'm gonna like re-record this, I swear to God. Never mind everything I just said about Glaceon in the first slot. Archer in the first slot, other people that's converting stuff into skulls underneath them. Alderfather, I would argue, is probably the most synergistic. He's turning reds to purples, yellows to skulls, and then he potentially summons stuff. But again, it's more this entangling thing. He's more of a purple troop than a green troop because of this, but since we're starting with the Leaf Storm with Archer, we're already entangling somebody. This guy will also entangle people. He's converting into skulls, which gives you that lethal damage chance. Heck, even if you did Forest Guardian and Divine Ishbala, they both start with mana. They both take yellow. So she's making yellow. He's making his own green. I don't think he's stealing anything. Yeah, he's not touching yellow gems. He is taking her... Or no, he's making more green. Yeah, these two would be perfect together. So if you're doing an archer lineup, put these two together. And, add Nemu in there and Alderfather, or like one of those two. There's your lineup right there. It'd be really good. So that was a really long-winded way of saying that Archer, really cool class. I think you can do a lot of good stuff with it. I'm going to go ahead and put it at the top of the B tier. That makes a lot of sense to me. Really cool class in general. That 50% mana start's nice. Doesn't have so much defensive capabilities besides that dodge, but overall pretty cool. So that gets us to the Assassin class. Assassin class is 10% chance to assassinate the last enemy when I do skull damage. So it's kind of like what we just talked about with Archer, where it's doing skull damage to potentially 15% chance to kill that person. Now it's whenever you do skull damage, you have a 10% chance to kill the last person. So that's kind of weird, right? Like it's, I hit this dude up here with a skull and then his friend down there just died from like secondhand sadness, like Queen Padme style or something. And then he's also got Hunt, so he's doing double damage with skulls. So again, you're getting this kind of a theme where if you're running an assassin, you probably want to be doing skull damage in some capacity. You're not really getting any other cool trees. You do get stealthy, which is pretty nice. But then you also get Rising Shadows, which also creates this other situation. So when I was talking originally about, what class was that? I think it might have been Plague. It was whomever else had Shadow. It might have been Thief, actually. This 7% to assassinate the last enemy when another enemy dies. So let's look at this again. Commit this to memory. When you kill somebody, the last enemy can potentially die 7% of the time. And here we have a 10% chance to kill the last enemy when I do skull damage. So if you do skull damage and this triggers, then you kill somebody, there's a 7% chance that that triggers this and then somebody else dies. So a lot of people like Assassin class because of that combo specifically. Like, you basically auto-win if that ever happens. Like, if that literally ever happens once, you know, that it's over, like, you won. And the original trait happens 10% of the time, so it's not too crazy. But of course, getting a 10% chance and a 7% chance, that's like not super likely. However, it happens. So if you're just grinding out PvP a lot, you have a team that works super well, this can do some pretty cool stuff. So I'm not necessarily going to review all the skull converters yet again, but they would all be equally as relevant for an assassin class. The only difference is that Glaceon, who I was like talking up before, makes a lot more sense in an assassin lineup in the first slot. Nope, no he doesn't. Clearly I don't play these two classes because you have to be in the top slot. So again, pretty much exactly the same stuff that I just talked about with Archer also applies to Assassin. They basically play the same. The only difference is I would argue that the Archer is probably better because they're more set up to, they have the Entangle with the Root Trap there. This person's trying to be sneaky. Like, they don't want to be in the first slot necessarily. They also get this dodge, but then they have Stealthy, which makes it a little more awkward. So I feel like this is kind of a less optimized version of an Archer, but it has the potential to do this extra 7% thing to kill. So both of them pretty cool, although I would argue Archer is the better version. Actually, as I reviewed Archer just then, I kind of want to make this class now. So I'm going to go ahead and put Assassin down here. Yeah, I think that makes more sense. You know what, even there. Even there. Yeah, I'm going to put that at the bottom of the B tier. Not the worst thing in the world, but it's kind of a gimmick. This is gimmicky. I can build around this and be more like reliable, dependable. This doesn't depend on magically getting kills. This can kind of force them a little better. Has a little bit natural defense to it. This is trying to do the same thing, and what it lacks in like consistency, it makes up for in like gimmick with that extra double kill thing. But the percentage chance to even start that is less, like 10% chance to do it versus a 15% chance to do it. So to me, Archer is a much more reliable, consistent, effective version of what Assassin's trying to do. This just might randomly kill people. So that's my pitch on that. Bard is, again, probably one of the classes that jumps out at you right away. It certainly did when I first started, seeing all yellow allies getting one stat at the start of each turn. This feels way cool. It is way cool, but it's only way cool for the early part of the game. After that, it's not really way cool anymore. So let us dig in and figure out why that's not super way cool. So when you look at the trees, you might get a sense of it right away. Hopefully I'm like teaching you through this super long video what trees are kind of good and what trees are kind of not. So when you look at this, morale not so good, knowledge not so good, arcane pretty good. So you pretty much only get the arcane tree to lean on. You get 50% mana start. You also do get all other allies starting with 15% mana. But that's kind of it. Like, those are the only two things, a little bit of spell resistance, that you get with this class. So it's kind of like, it's not creating yellow mana. It wants you to put a bunch of yellow people on your team, but it doesn't really give you any way of getting yellow people, or yellow mana. So that's kind of weak. It's a wild folk, which is also pretty weak. I like how they picked the new troop they just released as the, I just noticed that. They did that with Daughter of Ice as well. The latest, coolest troop is the icon for these things. Orpheus Loot, you would feel like is someone that would fit super nice, but again, it's an early game kind of weapon. When I first got Bard, and it was the first class I leveled up, admittedly, I'm like, oh, I'm enchanting everybody, that's how I'm going to get my mana. And in the early game, that's totally viable, but it's not really strong at all after the early game. So if you're going to go for like an easier early game, Bard is probably a really cool class to play as, but it's not really effective at any point after that. And since it's wild folk, there's kind of interesting wild folk, but not really. The problem I always have with these like type troops that I'm about to show you is that they're usually not that great themselves. So like Kin Silencius, for instance, he's giving all wild folk 50% mana start. It's a little redundant with Bard because you already have 50% mana start, so you don't need this. It's really if you're trying to build an exclusive wild folk only kind of team. He's doing this thing and it's boosted by a wild folk, so you're wild folk, he's wild folk, you might have two other wild folk. You get to do a decent chunk of damage based on this. He's also stealing 1 magic from all enemies affected, so he's taking 3 magic, and then he burns everybody. He's like okay, but it doesn't have any loot potential. The damage isn't high enough. This utility is only going to help other troops. It'll help himself and then anyone else that you're building that's Wild Folk, so that's kind of whatever. Wild Queen's obviously very, very cool, but Bard class by itself doesn't have any natural skull resistance. It doesn't have any kind of entangles, so it doesn't really fit with this. Silencius doesn't really do anything that synergizes with this either, besides the fact that they're both Wild Folk. Luna's, again, pretty cool. She'll give you some mana generation, so this will give your Bard that trait that you were missing, this extra loot potential thing. But again, the spellcast is kind of random, damage to all, and then inflicting either 2 bad status effects or 2 good buffs to your side, 1 to 2. Makes her kind of a weird troop. So when it comes to Wild Folk, there's not good ones, really. There's not, awesome ones. The only one that's good in here is Wild Queen, and admittedly she's very good, but she by herself does nothing with synergizing with other Wild Folk, so it doesn't really make sense. If you're trying to build a Wild Folk only kind of lineup, you would need to use someone like King Silencius. This person's a Wild Folk, but she's actually getting boosted by Fae, and she's summoning Fae, so it's kind of whatever. So Wild Folk not really helping anything with the Bard. Unfortunately, that's going to affect where it goes in the tier listing. I would argue that for the early game, it's probably A tier, but for the end game, it's kind of bad. There is where that should go. So we're down to the final 3. We do have an interesting final 3. Not so much with this next one, but this brings us to Deathknight. So Deathknight, what they do, this is the weirdest thing about Deathknight. So deathmark all enemies when I die. So that's weird, right? Just deathmarking everybody, but I have to die to do it. It's kind of this weird Hail Mary thing. If you've lost to the point where you've lost your hero already, you're probably in a bad spot. This saving you is going to be super random. So it's not really even a dependable way to try and kill people. It just makes them scared. It just freaks you out when everyone's deathmarked because you're worried you might die. And then we look at the talent trees and we get these kind of weird ones. So nothing super amazing coming out of this. The only interesting thing is I don't even know. It's the Ice Storm doesn't really even make a ton of sense, but that's there if you want it. So you can do a Dust Storm or an Ice Storm. Razor Armor is potentially better than that. I guess the problem I have with this is that there's not a real amount of synergy here. None of these things really work well together in any capacity. Storms is a very nice tree. I like it a lot, purely because of this, if nothing else, the ability to explode on 4/5. But the talent trees aren't working together. There's no theme here, there's no synergy here. It's just a bunch of random stuff. So it's kind of, I don't know, it just makes this bad thing. This is undead, so since I didn't review undead when we talked about Necromancer, I could talk about it real quick. So if we look at undead people, you'll see why I probably forgot to do it in the first place, because there's not that many cool ones. So Draculus is pretty bad, Fallen Valdis is very bad, Pharos is really only good for soul farming, Bone Dragon is a really bad skull converter, Keeper of Souls is pretty cool, but he's only converting skulls and not also converting mana, so it doesn't make him that great. Bloodhammer, again, very cool, but him being undead doesn't really matter as far as trying to build an undead only kind of lineup. Death Knight's not getting 50% mana start, so that's not very fun. So there's really nothing in here. It's kind of, there's no cool undead troops. It being undead doesn't really help, and depending on you dying to deathmark everybody is kind of awkward. So it's kind of bad. I'd argue it's maybe here, and that's only because I like Lightning Strike that bad in the Storm Tree to get that extra bouncing mana. It's pretty bad. It's unfortunate, but yeah, that's where that goes. But now we've got a cool final too. This is really when I meant to say we got cool people going on. So let us check out why. We've got this monster theme here, so all monsters are getting 2 life. Agile, which means you have a 20% chance to dodge skulls. I did find out later that this does stack with a talent that I'll show you later. So thank you to whomever said that. I think it was on Reddit. Someone pointed that out to me. I really appreciated that. And then we get this, which is nuts. This is nutso. All monsters getting 2 skill points to everything on 4 or 5 matches. So if you have a loop heavy lineup, everyone that's a monster on your team, and spoilers, this dude's a monster as well, is getting 2 skill points every 4 or 5 match. So we looked at Bard, who I kind of like put super low, getting 1 stat point to all yellows at the start of your turn. This guy can get people like anywhere from 2 to 12 stat points to all stats every turn if you have a very loop heavy kind of lineup. Way better than this dude. Way, 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 way better. And the talents are actually a lot more interesting. So we get Storms, which is very cool. So again, that's getting me my Lightning Strike. But then we also get access to Hunt, which, as we talked about before, is one of the best level 1 talents you can have. Doing double damage on skulls to people is super nice. So that's really cool. There's kind of nothing else in here, but just the fact that you can stat pump yourself super hard, you can do double skull damage to a lot of people, that's pretty cool. This exploding thing is also very cool. Down here there's really nothing of all that value. These 2 are okay, but you know, there's not a ton of these that you could even use. So when it comes to like monsters, which this guy is, then we get to look at, you know, what monsters could I potentially put in this kind of a lineup. And the answer is there's a lot of cool ones. So Arachnine Weaver, as we talked about, is pretty cool. Megavore is very cool. Scorpius is pretty cool. Glaceon's amazing. Corvash is pretty interesting. Chief Dargon's okay. Kraken's actually really nice. This will be one of the only classes I actually talk about weapons. So Jar of Eyes, super sick. Mana generation, it creates All-Seeing Eye troops. All of the All-Seeing Eye troops are also monsters. So if you run Dervish class with this, you've got your mana generation, you've got also summoning potential with troops that also will get stat pumped by your hero. So that is super duper cool. And then I think we actually got a weapon here. So for all monster allies you have, you can make a mix of green and brown. So that's really nice. So if you have, for each basic monster that you have, you'll make 3 green, 3 brown is what this really means. So if you have 4 monsters on your lineup, you're going to be making 12 green, 12 brown whenever you cast this thing. So that's pretty awesome as well. So those 2 weapons actually go really nice with the whole theme of Dervish. Like, not only does it help you with monsters, it also is boosted by monsters, and then in the instance of this weapon, it's making a lot of mana, which will help you with looping, which will help you with stat pumping, and that's really cool. In the instance of Jar, you're just getting lots of looping potential with blue mana. It's creating an ice storm. It's doing a lot of explosions. You're summoning other monsters. That part's really cool. So that actually puts the Dervish class as a very interesting class. As far as like what utility it brings to the table, it doesn't really bring utility to the table, but it brings an ability to really outscale the other team, which is very unique to all these other things. So that actually is going to put it up there in the A tier for me. It's really close as to like between Tidecaller and Dervish. I think they're very similar in the sense that like they have their own unique play styles that feel very different than most of these other ones, but they do bring something that's very effective to the table. So I'm going to actually go ahead and put Dervish up there in A. I'm really fighting myself on the placement between those 2, but I think that's about right. Which is going to bring us to our old boy Dragonguard. I think Dragonguard is probably the most interesting. I don't know about interesting. It's probably one of the most well-rounded, but not the best at anything kind of class that's out there. So Skull Reduction is very nice. It has some level of stat pumping, so for all dragons getting 1 life in magic, probably more importantly, on 4 or 5, that's pretty cool. So it has some level of stat pumping going on. Then we get to the talent trees, and what's this? Fire? My god. So it's like the fire tree mixed with these other mediocre trees, right? So fire tree means we get access to Fireblade, everybody's favorite thing. And we also get the ability to start a Firestorm at the start of battle, so that's pretty cool. We also kind of get Banishment in here, which is more of like a utility play. You can potentially take with Commander instead of this one, which would give you 2 doll skills if you're in the first slot. It's kind of whatever. Like, it's kind of whatever. Like, there's interesting stuff in here. I like the fact that the triple skull damage is there. I like the fact that I'm resistant to skull damage by 40%. I like that I have some form of magic pumping. This banishment these days in the current meta is actually very nice, so I kind of like that I have that. It's like, I like everything that it does, but we need to find out what dragons are out there that this thing could potentially synergize with, because all that magic pumping that I was talking about before, which synergize with dragons. So what dragons are... oh my god, I'm still not used to this. What dragons are out there? Elmogrim, so he loops. He's got purple mana that he makes. He also synergizes with burning a little bit, so he creates 8 purples, but then he also creates another purple for every burning person. So if you put him on a team with, like, Infernus, for instance, this will be making 12 purple every single time. That synergizes is pretty nice because Infernus will burn people, and Infernus also takes purple. The only thing that doesn't synergize here is that you're not going to be running a Darkstorm, so then you're going to be falling red. So that part less synergistic, but Elmogrim and Infernus together on a Dragonguard team is pretty cool. You're actually doing a decent amount of damage to everybody, making a lot of mana that everybody can use. If you could force a Darkstorm in the middle of all that, like those two together would be pretty damn sick. Worldbreaker is really nice. The only problem is that he doesn't do any kind of burning, but you would be stat pumping him a little bit. It's pretty slow. He'll probably stat pump himself better than you would ever be able to stat pump him as a Dragonguard. But either way, you're at least making him a little stronger. Tons of mana generation. That Firestorm is going to help you. I actually like Worldbreaker more than I originally did. When I update my tier list, I'll probably move him up a little bit. He's pretty cool. Divinia is also very cool, so this is somebody that's like, if you're magic pumping this person, you're just giving more and more and more life to everybody on your team. So for turtling up, like, she's extremely useful from a dragon perspective. Glitterclaw is pretty cool, although I find that converting to green mana for dragons is not that great. I tried to build a lineup around Worldbreaker and Glitterclaw, and it wasn't very effective, because again, like, I can't force the kind of green mana that I want for these two. Not with Dragonguard class, not like in any kind of easy way. Shegra is interesting. He does burn somebody randomly when you match red gems. That would seem to fit nicely with this class, but he gets no boosting based on the fact that I'm a Dragonguard. You know, all the one magic that I'm giving is doing nothing to him as far as spell abilities go, so it doesn't really fit. But then there's just like other really cool general ones, like Kristanex is very interesting. With like early game, he's very good. Sylvan Menorah is pretty cool. You know, magic pumping is pretty cool. He entangles the first dude on every 4 or 5, so that's pretty cool. Dragon Soul, of course, if you're soul farming, also very nice. Decent troop in general in a Dragonguard lineup. The boost is actually a little better here, so the damage that you're going to do is slightly better. Normally he's going to be doing about like 16 damage if it's just you and him, but if you put him with 2 other dragons, he's going to do like 20 some odd damage to everybody, pretty much blow up the board, gain some souls, so that's kind of cool. Penlong is pretty cool, damage to all, boosted by enchanted allies. He's got some skull reduction himself, like kind of a low tier dragon. I'm just turning this into a dragon review at this point, apparently. Lord Ember is pretty cool. He can turn whatever you want into red. He also gives everyone a magic. That's pretty cool. Dragtar is somebody that you want to use, but is probably not going to add as much value as you would like. In events, I could see him being a lot more useful because he could scale you up super fast. That part's more interesting. You'll have a little more time to do it. But in general, I find he's not... Whenever I put him in a lineup, I always like have this idea that it's going to be sick, and then it ends up being not that sick. But Dragonguard, as I mentioned before, from like what it can do with its talents, it's okay. Like, it's pretty good. And when I get this to 100, I'm going to see if I can make it amazing. The fact that I'm going to run it with Infernus almost certainly means that I'm going to get access to this all the time. And the other sneaky benefit of running Infernus, I'm not sure if other people know. I actually didn't know myself until like last week, which is kind of sad. He summons a Firestorm when an enemy dies. So as long as I kill people within the first 8 turns, I can kind of have a constant Firestorm running anyway, which kind of makes them feel like Sunspear. only they would be a Sunspear that has skull reduction and, holy crap, has skull reduction and the ability to magic pump a little bit, but then it would also kind of be constant firestorms, certainly not the same. But like that makes it kind of interesting, and then it would have access to banishment. So overall, I think Dragonguard is kind of like potentially cool, but not that cool. I do think it's better than these, however. It's really tight between Dragonguard and Thief. I think I like it better than Thief, though. I might make it better than Archer, actually, as well. Yeah, I think that's the right. So, overall, that is the tier list for the classes. I'm sure this video is like 80 hours long, so I apologize for that. However, again, if you're leveling things up, I think if you had only 2 classes to 100 and it was these 2, you'd be in a really good spot. If you got it to these handful, you'd also be in a really good spot. Once you get down here, it's kind of extremely circumstantial. Again, it's not that these classes are awful in every single instance, it's just that their use is a lot more limited. The use for these other classes are a lot less limited. You can do a lot more things with these classes than you can with these as you get a little lower in the list. So yeah, that's my tier list for all of the classes in Gems of War, at least as of 4.4. So thank you guys to anyone who literally tuned in for the entire duration of this video, but I hope it was interesting, and I will talk to you guys later. See you.